I'm going to get out of your way and let you do your thing.
Well, then you better get out of my way.
Without knocking
Appreciate
your
you, Ricky.
tools off.
All right. That's what grinders are for. Hey, guys, how are you doing today? Good stuff. Well, I do appreciate being here. I actually lived in New England for a little while. Does Vermont count? Just wondering, just don't know the local, way of looking at how pretension works or not, right? But I lived in Vermont for about 3 years, and when I was there, I worked for Shackleton Thomas Furniture, and I also did some work for Andrew Pierce Bowles when they were in the beginning stages of picking up some of their inventory and needing to build inventory. So I did that, and I was primarily making thicker vessels for Andrew Pierce, chargers and platters for him. For their company, Simon Pierce as well. But then then a couple years in, I transferred over to Shackleton Thomas. You guys familiar with Shackleton Thomas in Bridgewater or heard of them? Well, some good bit of information to pass around because it's always good to do that. I shall show just maybe some of their aesthetic and then maybe something dealing with what we'll be looking at today. How about we start it right here? These are just some things I've kind of been working on. I work on. I'm not going to do a whole long intro in terms of what I do, but I'm a professional woodturner by trade. When I was, say, after high school, got into cabinetry, the same bug of loving woodturning, falling in love with it. It's what happened to me, too. So I was able to do that and be able to spend some real significant time developing. And so I learned to eventually become a master woodturner and work for some of these companies, working for myself. And at this point, because I'm a practitioner in woodturning, I like to be able to go share with others what I know and just talk about the things that really helped me develop and just to try to be encouraging to others. So when we start this morning, what I want to do is maybe look at the Skew chisel first, and then we're going to get into doing a demonstration talking about what I call wood pottery. And wood pottery just is, so the Skew is something that we didn't sort of plan on for the demo. We have enough time to run into something that's kind of fun and we can pass around the room. Just I want to see people who haven't taken a course from me or haven't seen the usage of a Skew, see that put to use and put out into the floor. That'll be quick enough, and then we'll get into the wood pottery vessel, and then some other stuff that's green in the afternoon. And so this is going to be pretty fast and furious, and I hope you guys have some good times with it. So you guys, if you have questions, you don't have to wait till the end. You can just kind of, this is not library hour to me. We all know each other in here, or you guys know each other. Just be normal, just be yourself, and whatever that means, right? Should I be concerned? But anyway. Yeah, that's fine. I do like a heckler. I do. I do enjoy a heckler. But anyway, we're going to start with the Skew chisel, and I'm going to see what I have that's actually quite simple and basic to start with, and show you guys just some exercises we were working on the other day. And although this is a fairly uninspiring softwood, we're going to still make some use of it. Let's see if we can actually start here with that. And we'll go through that. So I'm going to be using a larger Skew. Let's see if we can actually even fit this in here. Looks like we can. So many ways to set up a piece between centers. At the moment, I'm just looking to show just a little bit of what tool control means and how we can maybe apply some thinking in the way that we use the tool. You can see this isn't too tight right now. Obviously, I'm not going to turn this. That's not a safe situation at all. I'm just basically finding my center, which I have a mark already there placed. I'll at least get it centered enough now, and then I'll cinch the four-jaw chuck down onto my blank here, and that's really nothing to write home about now. But this is just a little bit of practice. This is something that you can work on and make sense of, practicing a little bit. This kind of camera shot will probably just account for being overhead. So when we're looking at this, it's just an overhead shot. That's what we're looking at. But yeah, I appreciate you guys' effort for putting things together here, and it's a group effort, and it takes a village, so I appreciate it. So we'll start at actually a pretty high speed. This is probably not perfectly true, but that's a little too slow. I'm looking to actually make a clean cut, probably around the 2000 range, and so that's where I'll start. And when I make my cuts, firstly I'll take a look at some bevel support. After this, after a few exercises, I'm going to get into turning a square with the Skew and then making a spinning top. So first cut I'll make is with a little bevel support. This is going to be a planing cut, little bit of a burnish, and I'm raising the handle up a little. I'm using the lower half of the tool that's actually nearest the tool rest. That would be essentially right here in that region. And so let's just, like any other blank, true up the surface. Then after that, what we'll do is roll a few beads, just so we can kind of have a look at what the larger scale for getting down to between centers looks like. We'll then transfer over to doing something a little more technical, even though that's not technical. So when you practice a bead, I don't practice beads that are thinner, I practice ones that are wider. So it's more of a sphere. A spherical shaped bead is one that actually helps you be able to see that when the bevel has to trace across the profile, has to trace a little bit longer. Thus, if you are rolling clean beads, your practice and your effort is actually being paid off well. Now, when I cut my V-grooves, I am using the long point of the skew. I never use the short point because that inverted edge that's essentially coming in now will often create a catch. So when I make a V-groove, I'm going to be using the long point, like I just said. It takes maybe about 6 or 7 cuts to roll a bead for practice, just so that you can get the depth of the V-groove down far enough that you can then cut a few equidistant beads. So this is just kind of going to show a good etiquette, and the etiquette here is just talking about practicing with the tool and getting good results. Not everyone can take a class, and so what I like to do is also speak to others that are on the stage of learning, at a stage of learning that will help them out if they look at a couple of these things here. So why don't we just roll a couple of beads and just kind of play around with this for a second. What I'm going to do is start at the center. When I roll a bead with a skew, I'm not going to be using the long point here. I'm actually going, and let me see if I can, so there's my long point. I'm going to be using the short point of the skew. And that will ensure that because this is the more radiused area of the tool, I will actually not have an apex at the center. And that's due to the type of shape that this tool will cut. If I cut to the right or left with the short point, I'll create more of a convex sweep. If I cut to the right or left with the long point first, I'll create a somewhat of a convex sweep. It'll be more conical, and I'll have a point at the top, which I don't want. If you're rolling a bead, you actually want to start with the shorter point. And also, I have the handle not entirely straight onto the piece, but slightly angled here, so that what I can do is actually proceed the roll without having the unsupported edge lift up and catch. If I start too square, if I just lift this up, that can catch or create a run back. As some of us in the class yesterday, some of them they have a sense of humor, apparently. Can you guys hear me back there okay? Sound okay? Okay, thank you. So we'll roll a bead. There's a burnish mark. People ask me all the time, how much pressure does it take to turn something or to create a burnish? How much pressure do you need? When you see a burnish mark, you're done applying pressure onto the wood. A burnish mark is as hard as you need to actually press against the material. There's a burnish mark, so then you roll. You have to be sure to actually close the short point and the bevel all the way. That's the point here. And although it's convex, it's still a point, long point, short point, but the short point makes the cut, really. Also, this is an area, because this is end grain fiber, that when I roll, it's a little denser in the region where the half bead and the curve begin, because of where the end grain and the side grain intersect. So you have to have a little bit of a pinch when you actually roll all the way down and just continue all the way down. If you don't, that can actually be one of the cases where if you're starting to roll, this edge can catch a little bit. So you have to really be dedicated to rolling that bead. Let's go the other way for our second now, to the left, all the way down into the corner. More of an egg shape right there, but it'll get there. But it's okay to practice. It's not a bad thing. This is now rolling into the long point. And we'll go to the other side. Same thing. Usually takes a couple. And bevel support, rolling now into the short point. Again, I can roll back into the long point. I'm never going to start at the center, though, with this edge going to left or to the right, just given that what I'll have is a point here. So roll beads to the left and right. Use the short point to roll. That'll ensure that what you have on the top of the bead is round, not a point. Okay, that's what you're looking for if you're rolling a bead. You use a long point in this region where the half bead begins. Half bead just means, well, half of a bead. Doesn't mean that's what it means. It's a half of a bead. There you go. So there's one little half bead. Let's do another. So you can see that right there I have to break the fiber a little bit because it's a little denser right in this area. So you have to pinch and really kind of not put too much pressure on the wood. Mind the burnish mark as the amount of pressure that you applied, and that's what you got to keep doing. Just keep kind of going with it. Keep rolling with it. At the center again. Just roll another bead. Bevel support first. Same thing. If you can create a series of equidistant beads, means you're doing a pretty good job. But there's the roll. These are looking pretty symmetrical. Little finger support here and tool control matters. I like to teach people about things like that so that what you can do is really enjoy a little bit more time in your shop. We're going to make some items today that are pretty finely turned, and we'll talk about the grinds and what we're doing in every step of the way. There's a little small bead. You'll notice that I made the small bead with the long point, and that's okay as long as I'm using, as long as the width of the bead is around 1/4 of an inch or less. At that rate, I don't really have much room or material to actually account for creating an apex or a point at the center of it. So, but I would say that for a bead this wide, you guys, you have to make sure that you roll the bead with the short point. That'll really help you out and actually make some of your work a little finer and just make your time more well spent. And so that's just showing just a little bit of practice and etiquette there. A little wider form here. Let's also go to show something else. Let's make a smaller bead. There's the long point. Again, long point's okay on a smaller bead because I don't, again, have so much material there that I can't utilize this section as a fulcrum. There's a fulcrum right here as well. So now what I'll do, bring this in. This is just a little exercise. I have to make sure that I don't take that planing cut, which this is a planing cut. Just a planing cut, holding the tool at about 45 degrees to the body, somewhere in that range. And if I peel right here, the nice thing about this type of sweep, which is more square ground, yet it is convex, is I can hold the tool in such a way where I don't have to have the handle away from the body. I can keep it right here and let pretty much the body do the work. And of course, again, pressure is not so important here. It's just that I need to make sure that if I do rub the bevel, and I do need bevel support because there's not a square here, I can actually rub the bevel, that I'm not placing a lot of pressure, only enough to see a burnish mark, and then you're good. So there we go. Just a little bit of a cove. And also, let's go ahead and account for where that bead is. I think it's right in here. There it is. You'll see that the peeling cut's better in here because if I take this cut and go all the way through, this can actually tear this bead. So this is actually a good practice on softwood. Again, there's a long point. Here's me accounting for some clearance. Long point's now going to roll. Got to roll that bead. Again, I'm utilizing the side stock of the tool for a fulcrum. And now I'll go ahead and go underneath this bead. And what I'm looking to do is actually turn this into a loose ring. We'll do that here in a second. We'll actually take this larger scale exercise down to the smaller scale. There's the short point. Now I'm peeling, making a nice peeling cut all the way into where I'm defining where my bead is. And my bead in this case is a raised bead. That's all good. There we go there. Just a peeling cut. Even though a peeling cut is a scrape just means I'm taking the tool straight in and it's hitting the edge first without bevel support. This is now actually a cut that's utilizing bevel. That's actually a shear. That's actually a very clean cut. Here we go. To be careful to not bring this in and actually have that tear turn into where the bead is. Of course, that's going to mean that I tear the bead out. I don't want that. Then I won't have one. Notice how thin that I'm keeping it, guys. That's quite thin. Can probably still account for rolling that a little bit more. But these are just a couple quick items of practice that help us look at a tool that's, I think, misunderstood. And it's for, it's for good reason. It'll make you say interesting things, right? Like, oh, gee, I'm so sorry, you know. It'll make you say worse things than that. That's true. You'll probably define a brand new slang language with the Skew. And I understand. Takes a little time. Now, I've been turning for about 20 years, and I spend a lot of time on the lathe. But you don't need 20 years to practice something and get a result. This is just showing you a practical way to do this to get a result for practicing. This isn't a project. This is just practicing right now. And there's the long point going under. Looks like I have a smaller amount of material here to the higher portion of my cove. I'm sweeping underneath this little loose ring, which will be loose. That's very thin. And I want to break it off from this side to ensure that this goes on to the other. Long point is acceptable here. That should come right off, and there it is. There's a little loose ring. And that just goes to show that with a little time, practice, and effort, you can learn to practice something that can get you a good result. Not necessarily so you can roll loose rings all day. You might want to do that initially because it sure is fun to do. But it's one of these things where these are just this is an effort of practice just to get you to understand the Skew a little bit and just to see what's going on. It's okay to step into your shop and just take a tool and put it to work. That's okay to do. Let's do one more. Just for fun. Notice the bead's thin. Oh, there she is. I said, there she is, because you sound like my wife. 4 rings, right? I'll just do one more. Rick, I'll have you do the other one. How about that? You do number 3, and I'll put a 3rd ring on here. But this is going to be the guy that does it. How about that? So just going underneath. This bead's a little thicker. Of course, it's not thick. It's thicker than the one I have here. Notice how thin that is. Guys, when you're practicing, practice with a softer wood like poplar or even cottonwood, and it's not going to get a great result if you're scraping. But you will see that if you do stop the lathe and you do take a look at the surface, you should have a pretty clean surface. The speed that I'm turning at does matter. I'm turning at a much higher speed. I'm turning at probably around maybe 2,000 RPM. So this is a pretty clean surface right here, okay? I'm just kind of showing that that's what we're working on at the moment. We're about to switch over to something very different here in a second, still with the Skew, and then we'll move on to a side grain project. But for demos, I appreciate having the time with you guys because it allows me to be able to talk to you, kind of interact and engage. It's nice to be able to do that and be human. And it's nice to be able to actually get something done rather than just show an effort of practice, even though those are good things. Let's just go ahead and maybe connect this cove sweep one more time. Do it on this side of the spindle, and then what we'll do is go ahead and switch on to something else. The key in making sure that I break a ring free, however, is knowing something that the height of the bead is a little greater than the width. And that's accounting for the pressure the raw pressure going on underneath the bead with the Skew, which can very easily break. And I don't want that. A loose ring means that, well, I didn't glue it back up. It's actually loose, but it's still solid. So let's hope for that. And so the thinner the bead that you make, the better for the sake of practice. Just so we know. Find the bevel support. And take the long point in. There it is. Sometimes you have to realize something else. You're getting smaller here. Lower the tool rest. I'm keeping the same distance, though, from the stock into the... this same distance from the working stock and the tool rest. So I think maybe we'll break this free now, and there's another. You can keep doing this all day. It's kind of fun, okay? It's one of those things where just doing a little bit of practice, something that helps you warm up, and something that helps you get a good result's okay. Coming back to just highlight and focus on a little effort of not perfection, but progress. You know, we don't need to be perfect. There's no such thing as that. And some people say, wow, your turning is perfect or your tool control is perfect. It really isn't. It's just time spent, and it's just having a sense of what the muscle memories brought you. And the time spent in the practice is, of course, a reflection of that, of good work. So when I teach and I try to get people things that will help them do just that. It's just improve. And, you know, that's the thing is we all improve. We get better. I do the same thing. You know, no level of skill is without the ability to still find some improvement somewhere. So it's always good to know that. Not be intimidated with it. Try it. That's okay. If you want to create a new slang language, I understand. The Skew does that. I do get it. So this is just kind of showing a little bit of practice, folks, for something that you can just kind of mess around with. And the result doesn't have to be perfect. If you can get one loose ring, that's a good day. Give yourself a pat on the back, because if you're turning wood, you're your own cheerleader pretty much. Unless you got Rick around here for you. Rick will cheer you on, and are you ready to turn the third ring? I don't think so. I didn't think so. Yeah. But anyways, guys, I'll probably just break this off now. Maybe I'll switch to a different Skew. Excuse me. No pun intended there, right? Ha ha ha. Yeah. Ha ha. Sorry. I like to have fun. Can everyone tell that I have no personality? Okay, good. Glad we know. This is a good crowd, though. I really appreciate you guys. It's fun to be back in New England. I always love coming here. Well, I mean, I lived out here, so it's a pleasure to come back and just deal with folks. And ever since COVID ended, it's just nice to be able to just be around people and just talk real. And just that's something I value. I treasure that, and I appreciate your guys' time. So there's a downhill cut. This is all with a long point. I'm utilizing bevel support for this. And there's no real, you know, with this, there's no real right way to look at what this is. I don't need to sand or finish this up. It's cut clean enough. It's a softer wood, but this is just kind of going to show a little bit of spindle practice. And why don't we go ahead and maybe take this off here in a second. We're about there, and we'll get into something that actually is more project-based. And we'll be right there. So there's that. We'll just hold on to that and just show that we can practice on a little spindle just to have a result that goes to show us something that's That's just practice. It's just like a warm-up. So it's okay to do that. It's good to do. And it's also, so a roughing gouge is what I would recommend to rough something down with initially. Now I'm going to use I'm going to contradict that entirely because I'm going to use a skew. But it's better to use a roughing gouge, I think, in general, if you're in a production setting. If you're showing how a tool works, though, I'll use a skew just so you can see its usage. But I prefer a skew because I feel like it's about what tool allows you to control how much bevel support you need in a cut. And you don't need a lot of bevel support in a cut. You need a little, but not a lot. And then finding where that happy medium is what wood turning is about in terms of using the bevel. So it's a preference, but I do think that for me, I think it's easier to use a skew for doing shaping, even though I can use a spindle gouge quite well. Keep it on the side of preference rather than saying, if you don't use this tool, it's wrong or something like that. And I don't like that theory. It's not a theory, that's just dogma. I don't like that. I think it's better to be able to let people decide what things work for them and don't. That's just kind of where I come from on wood turning. There's so many ways to do it. So many. These are all these are all freehand sharpened. Yeah, all freehand sharpened. Yeah. So what's the grind? So this is, I would maybe refer to this as something that is still more of a square ground profile, but it's not so tapered that it's not accounting for a convex sweep. I prefer to have a nice little outflowing convex sweep here. But square ground for the sake of how I peel. So if I'm peeling, I don't want to have angle that's so sharp and asymmetric and straight, because that means that if it's this way, then I have to move the handle that way to accommodate for moving the square edge over to sit adjacent. So I want a square ground profile so I can keep the tool square enough. In all my tool control, I have a fulcrum here near the ferrule of the tool. I have a fulcrum here at the body, and I have a fulcrum, of course, on the tool rest in the hand. So when you're turning, you're not, this is not a harpoon. This is not, we're not going deep sea whale hunting with this. This is really a very simple tool, but turning is not something that's aggressive. It's something where it's more of a fine dance, or it's about finesse in that way. Oh yeah, these are by the way, these are tools that I sell, guys. If you're interested in tools, like I can talk to you about that. But yeah, this is I'm using collets with the handles. Yeah, I really like these. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want the width of the stock to be. Sorry, I want the length of the bevel from the heel on the open side of it and length here. I want that to run just a little longer. I don't necessarily say, here's the exact length it should be, but I don't necessarily want it the same length as the width here. I want it just a hair longer so that I have a little bit more bevel support so I can take a thicker planing cut or a thicker peeling cut. And then there's a point where if it's too long, and that's subjective because it's a lot to do with pressure and how you use a tool as well. So saying this codified length of, oh, it must be, then things can get lost because general parameters are better to speak on. Now, the angle I have is about 20 degrees on both sides. About 20 and 20 is about where it's at. Yep. I'll pass these around in a little bit. Who's wearing open toes next to someone they don't like? I'm kidding. All right. Don't do that. Everyone likes each other in here. Those donuts went away really quickly, by the way. They really did. They worked. So I'm going to put a piece in the four-jaw chuck, as you can see. However, if I ever do this, you always make sure that you have tailstock support initially. Don't just put this in here as a square and call it good. It's not good. It's good enough, but what is good enough? Probably not good enough, right? So what I want to do is make sure if I only have the ability to have maybe two jaws touching here, I'll go ahead and actually cinch up my tailstock support. And I like to have a protrusion at the quill, maybe around 2 or 3 inches. That's just giving me more potential width around the bed here. And I will put a good grip on this on both keyholes. I am going to rough this down with the skew, really just on one side, and then turn this around and put this in the chuck. But I figured I'd start somewhere since we have something a little different before we get into doing side grain stuff, because I know some people probably want to see the skew. We just ran a class on it, so it's relevant enough that we just at least cover it for a quick second. Oh yeah, that's right. There it is. Janet, it is for you. Yeah, there you go. Good stuff. But that's good little practice. I don't need a lot of support here. I don't, in terms of pressure, just a little. Now I don't want to be too close. If I have a square, that's obviously too close. That's too far away. I want to be close enough that I probably maintain a 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch gap between where the corner would be sort of running past or moving past the tool rest. So that's looking pretty good where it's at. That's about maybe 3/8 of an inch. And in terms of height, I don't want it too low or too high either. It's too low. That's an absurd example, but it's too high. And what I want to do is be high enough that if I'm to place the tool flat on my rest here, that what I have is tracing a line, going to show that I'm somewhere about, my line's just, you can see the blank, it's about right here. That's about above a half, a little bit above a half portion of my blank. It's going to mean that when I rough down, I'm going to be hitting more side grain rather than end grain fiber. And so this is an end grain stock. This is all longer grain that's running with the bed. So if I actually make a cut starting lower, and I'm going in this direction, the trouble is that all the denser fiber right here I'm hitting, and that's going to really tear out. It's very much like what the bristles of a broom look like. This is quite colorful. But what I don't want is to have a situation where what I'm looking at is this. This is kind of fiber. If I cut directly into the end grain fiber, I will be at a lower position on the tool rest. So given that, I don't want to actually create this action here. I'll dig in like that. I don't want that. I want to be higher up on the tool rest so that there are more longer grain actually being laid down, making the cut. This is why in end grain turning, downhill cuts are why you don't create tear out, and why if you cut uphill, you do. So if you're with a skew, if you're cutting with a skew, roughing gouge, what have you, any tool, you're going to hit some end grain fiber, but the tool rest, if it's a little higher up, they're at an area where you're going to be hitting more grain that's basically laying down onto the blank. So that's something that is useful to know. So that's why I have it a little higher. And now what I'll do is keep the same speed and go ahead and rough this down. Pretty fast. This is going to be fast and furious. I'll probably be around 2,300 RPM. I have to have tailstock support if I'm doing this. I don't start at the center of a blank for a particular reason. Let's see why. Did that get you?
No.
I was trying. No.
You missed.
I missed. There you go. So you'll see that if I make a downhill cut, I hope this shows it fairly well. Yeah, it does. So you can see my point of entry here is quite clean. But you'll see if we zoom in, that's not what I want. That's called just cutting uphill. So if I cut uphill, that's what I'm going to do. If I cut downhill, I'll get a nice clean cut. So it's good to know that my tool rest shouldn't be too low. It should be that a good setup is that if it's straight, if it's just sitting flat on the rest, I should probably be able to draw a line that's about 3/4 of the way to the top. So essentially an upper third region is looking to be somewhere about maybe right in here, just as a frame of reference. So instead of hitting a wall of end grain, if you start to an area that's closer to the corner, that's going to allow a runoff point to not be this wall of end grain. So let's go ahead and do that instead, and we'll see a good result. When I cut to the right and I'm using a skew, I'm a righty, so I can keep my right hand's on the ferrule of the tool, the dead weight of the handle's dropping and hitting the side right here. When I make my cuts, just following through with the lower portion of my cutting edge. Now you're getting some, are you? Good. You know you wanted it. It's what he asked for. I don't feel bad. It's all good. But anyway, a little bit of bevel support there. I'm not looking for this. I'm looking for this. Once I get there, I know that if I have a better hold is going to be a dovetail. Let's firstly true up the end grain fiber here because I don't want to hear this either. I'm looking to get rid of the sound of construction. Let's do that. Go straight in. And then I can actually true up my grain. That's a very sharp edge. I can bevel it with a long point, just raising the handle, little bevel support. That actually gives me an area to where I can more easily form a V-groove and then actually roll the tool slightly to true up my grain. I'll lower it a little because I'm going to be ending at a slower portion near the live center. So there we go, just rolling. That just goes to show a little fine tool work, and then go ahead and have ourselves a little tenon. There we go. Doesn't have to be too dovetailed, but just enough to have also a shoulder. That should go in straight at 90. Looks to be good there now. I'm often in a case of being able to just bevel the corners because the wood's spinning fast. That's a saw blade. Okay, that's all it is. We'll slow this down. It's a good practice to know that when you step away from the lathe, slow the lathe down to 0, my friends. Please keep it down to 0. 0 is your favorite speed until it's not. And we obviously know that when you go above 0, the more fun and exciting things can happen. And then bad things can happen too. And that's not true. That's really not funny because that element of things makes it so that we don't have the time to think about how bad something can be. You don't have a catch and then say, okay, no, I'll move. It doesn't work that way. It's only funny when it doesn't happen, and you can joke around about it, but make sure that you mind that when you walk away from the lathe, or if you even just take something off the lathe, whether it be fixed in one way or the other, just turn your speed down to 0. But now that I have a nice round tenon, nice solid tenon, I can go ahead and actually switch over to going higher speed here in a second. So just know that. It's very much like if you're turning a pen or turning something, anything that's smaller, and you happen to pick up your kids from school or go take a walk or just not turn that day or something like that. But you then decide that you aren't going to turn a pen when you get back, but your lathe's spinning at about 2,600 RPM. And you say to yourself, you know what I feel like doing today? I feel like turning a 16-inch diameter or a 28-inch diameter, something or other. And that something or other, if you happen to forget about the speed, will be a very bad day. Or it will be something that will always remind you as to why you start at zero. Keep your speed down, folks, until you actually set your blank up. You know who I'm also talking to? Myself. I'm talking to myself too, because as someone who turns quickly and efficiently, I have to remind myself of that, because oftentimes I'm so used to the muscle memory of this process. Some elements of safety can leave a professional when they're just turning all day. So I do it to remind myself too. So just letting you know, it's not just for you, it's for me too. So high speed now, not quite yet. Let's go a little higher than that. And maybe what we'll do is turn this into an interesting top, and just so we can have something that goes around the room and we can try to spin it in a bowl and just kind of keep the momentum going. So I want to get rid of this, looking for this. Long point of the skew I haven't mentioned in terms of the planing cut. Well, a planing cut's like this. That's basically holding the tool at an angle, 45-degree angle, close to that. It's not straight on, it's angled enough so that I'm essentially just keeping the long point, or whatever is the unsupported edge, out of the way. And the supported edge is just down on the tool rest, and that's just a portion of the tool that's making my cut. Most of the time my cuts are made from the body, in that when I make the cut, they're basically right in this direction here. I'm moving the body to make the cut. I'm not doing this a whole lot. So just mentioning those things. Finding the bevel support. That's just a nice peeling cut, just to shorten the blank a little bit. And we'll go the other way. Now, if I'm left-handed, you could make a cut going to the right with the long point, like so. This is a left-handed cut. But as a righty, as a right-handed person, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable making this cut with the short point. And the reason for is that if I use the long point as a right-handed person, because I didn't mention the long point, I have to stand all the way over here to make the tool work efficiently. Now, I can make the cut standing square, but look what happens based on how my sweep is inverted now. That's long point cutting to the right. I'm not going to cut, because if I do, and I'm this far over to actually plane, it's very likely that I'm going to catch. This to me is more of actually a left-handed cut if you're leading with the long point. So long point to the left, so long point facing the right means that I'm typically making this right-handed. However, you'll see that when I get down onto a smaller scale, we'll be able to do both, because the areas of the fine detail are in a much more compact area, so it doesn't make much of a difference. But generally speaking, for making planing cuts, if I'm cutting to the right, I'm typically always using the short point. If I cut to the left, because I don't have to move the bevel over to get the unsupported edge out of the way, I can cut both with the long point or the short point. Overhand or underhand does not matter. The tool is doing the same thing. It does not matter. So I prefer maybe underhand, but that's called preference. It's okay to develop in such a way to then have a preference for the way you use a tool and get a result. And I prefer a radius because I can use a wider portion of the bevel when I'm making my cuts. So there's a little corner. Let's go ahead and now make something. Now, much to what my point was on the beads, if I make a bead and I roll at the center with the long point, what does that do? It creates more of an apex. If I use the short point, it creates more of a convex shape that matches the sweep of the tool. So it doesn't matter so much if I make a downhill cut with the long point, and the trajectory is not across with the bed here, it's more or less down. So I can make a cut across the grain with the short or the long point, so I find. But either way, just showing that this makes more of a conical shape, the long point. There's a conical shape. A more convex shape is going to be with the short point, because it's matching the sweep of the bevel. Bevel support just means that I'm firstly looking for a burnish mark. That burnish mark should match the amount of pressure that's actually needed. I have to stay committed to the roll if I'm going to do it, and there we go. So there's a nice surface there, nicely burnished. We can see that the burnish makes a nice difference. I think I'll keep it for now, and I'll move over to a smaller skew. So now we can go ahead and maybe peel. What's nice also about this particular shape of a skew is I can use it like a parting tool as well because the cutting edge is not tapered so much. There's a minor taper on it, but it's more of a flat ground profile, like so. So now what I'll do is make sure that I have some mass to account for the cuts I'm making. And that's going to be a nice OG sweep, which is just a cove, which meets up with, in this case, a bead. And then I'll continue a sweep that goes back down into an area. And I think I'll have a little teardrop finial at the base. This is going to be a top. And there's a little bit of a bead right there, rolling that nicely. And short point, I do like this skew because it allows me to utilize detail nicely, utilize finesse to create the detail. That's really maybe what I meant more so. I'm lowering the tool rest just so that what I can do now is get over to this detail, this little teardrop finial, using both the short and the long point to account for getting into a nice area to define something of a nice shape. Little Hershey kiss maybe is kind of what it looks like. But it's a pretty nice and ornate little design here. I'm happy with what I see. I'm just kind of feeling the surface to make sure what I'm not feeling is tear out. I don't want any tear out. This is primarily about just being able to cut very clean. There we go. I'm going to go ahead now and maybe flatten this at the top and then work on the back side of this a little, keeping this mass but still accounting for removing a little bit of it. So let's do that. And now we'll make more of a downhill cut. Pretty nice sweep in here. There we go, and pretty happy with that. I'm looking to maybe, if I do sanding on this at all, really be able to start my procedure at around 320. I don't really want to spend a lot of time sanding. And I shouldn't have to. Proper usage with the skew means that I should be able to cut this clean enough that there shouldn't really be an issue with needing to sand really at all. I think 320 should be about as much as I need. The details that I'm making now are really commentary on knowing that this mass supports the cuts more so around here, and that in order to go back and do any shaping, well, I need some pressure there, or I need some support from this region. And so that's looking to be okay. I'm happy with what I see. Little finger support goes a long way. There we go. And maybe what I'll do is I'll taper this a little bit. I like to maybe taper that area. That'll be a nice look. What I'm looking to do now is preserve and save blade life for when I actually make my stem. So these are just scraping cuts right here. A scrape just means there's really no bevel support. Is this a bad cut? No, there's nothing wrong with scraping. It gets so misconstrued. There's nothing wrong with the scrape. Scraping's okay, but I know that I can go back down to, say, a different element of where the process is, different area of the stem, and I can still use my bevel support. Now in this region, now that I have the top base made, what I'm going to do is account for an area where I have the clearance to be able to create a loose ring one area and maybe somewhere else. And yeah, a scraping cut is just making sure that if I'm just have the cutting edge involved and there's no bevel support, that's considered a scrape. That's all the scrape means. Just no bevel support. That's all it means. Yep. Now, albeit if you're making a scraping cut, there's sometimes this bevel support. For instance, this is also bevel support, but it's more of a scrape. It's kind of a combination. You are utilizing some bevel to actually force the tool into the material enough that there is bevel support. It's just primarily the cutting edge and not as much. A true shear cut with bevel support starts with a burnish mark, begins with being able to trace that burnish mark. That's what that is. That's really all the difference is. That's all it is. So now in here, I'm looking to find an area where I have an area to have clearance. I have plenty of clearance in here. What I'm going to do now is view this as an area to be able to break a bead free, potentially. Maybe I'll move it a little closer. I think that's what I need to do. I think this is a little too far, a little too towards the center. I'm looking for my top to be somewhere around in here. I don't want too long of a stem where this thing's not going to spin very well. So maybe about in this region is more about what I'm actually after. And then maybe we'll have another little bead that we break free right there. Let's do a couple. This is the time where if my wife was here, she said, you only do 2 rings? That's pathetic. She's funny like that. She has fun. I wish she was here. We want 4 rings. Yeah, I know. So I'll show you when you're older, Rick. I'll show you when you grow up. Okay, no, you're fun. So I'm going to go ahead and shape this base down a little bit, the stem. That's all short point. There's a long point going in. That'll give us something to look at while the top's spinning, sort of. That's kind of how I view that. And I like this little bit of detail there. Long point, shearing cut there. And now we'll take this down. It looks like I have some clearance in here nicely. That's good to know. We'll take this bead down further, and I have 2 steps. There's one, there's the other. And now these are going to be much too large of beads. Let's make the bead and actually see what we're looking at. So it looks like right in here is going to be where my beads are. There's my long point. And there's my long point. This is just defining the 2 little areas of where my beads can break free. I'll break this one free first, the larger bead, and then get to the smaller scale. However, I want to still utilize this material as weight support so that I can actually get underneath this. And it looks like I have a good amount of clearance here to be able to do this nicely. I am accounting for actually seeing the bead fully. Both half round beads, that's 1 half round. Here's the other in terms of one side of the bead and the other. And this is allowing me to be able to see what I have. You can hear that. That just means, well, I'm obviously getting a little thinner. Let's just keep breaking this down a little bit more. And that's just a nice sweep with the short point. And here we go. And here we go again. Maybe we'll go ahead and even make the bead thinner. Focus very much on like the practice exercise, keeping the bead a little thinner. That always helps with things in the long term, to not have to put so much pressure on yourself. To have to go through a wider bead is a problem. If you're going through too wide of a bead, it'll probably break. Go thinner and then adjust to the particular thickness that you prefer. That just takes time, effort, and preference, and we all have those things. Or most of us have some of those things, I should say. I think that's a fair enough statement. Here we go. Looks like that's going to be a nice area to break a ring free. Looks like that's a good size too. Let's maybe get down to where we can see a little bit larger ring. I like a larger and a smaller ring on a stem. Let's go ahead and maybe break this one off now. We're going to roll this and now actually take the taper down, being that we probably don't need to shape too much in this region. But I want to make sure I have a little tool support, or tool rest, or finger support, both in this case. And this will be something that you guys can have for your club. And I already have a couple for you anyway, so you guys are gonna be loose ring crazy in some of what you guys have. Downhill cut now. But this is a fun thing to do where you can just kind of wake up to a little bit of skew practice. That'll definitely it's just like having coffee. I'll just say that. Maybe it's just like having coffee. I don't know. Or worse, I don't know. Got to have my coffee. But anyway, I'm going to break this larger or taller bead free first. Let's go ahead and maybe go under this just a hair. Okay, and then maybe we'll account for bringing this sweep down a little bit more now that we have the support that we need. And now we'll go ahead and round this section. And lowering the tool rest is also helpful so that I can actually get into the end grain fiber a little bit cleaner. I find that if I'm all the way up here, that pressure at an angle will typically break that bead right off, and I'm not looking for that. But even if you make a nice shape with the skew, that's kind of judging your own level of expertise with it, or your own level of skill, or just where you happen to be with it. So always make sure that you mind keeping yourself motivated and that you account for giving credit where credit's due for your own efforts. So we're doing pretty good here. That's about the thinness of the bead that I want. Now, that bead's much wider, but I'm going to thin that out, and I'll probably come down to an area to where I'll account for this smaller area being the bead here. I like a larger and a smaller bead, like I said. Short point right here. When you do break the bead free, it's with the long point. Let's go ahead and maybe get under this a little bit more. I bet you we got it. We're so close to it. There we go. So there's one. There's a small one right there. And then what we're looking to do potentially is, and that's very thin. That's how it should be. Let's maybe make this a little thinner right here. Let's account for that. Oh. And maybe move this over a hair. So now that we've gone this far, what we want to do is maybe do one more, just so we can see that we got it. Maybe I'll put a little bit of a V-groove in here. It's okay to add a little detail wherever you see you might need one. I don't know if I need that one. I just want it there. So I'll keep going here a little bit more so. The thing that I'm looking for is clearance, and it looks like I have it here between this bead and the long point. And I'm looking to, again, get underneath that area. Long point of my skew is now rolling this bead. Again, thinner bead, you can do that. And I don't know where the top will end. Maybe it'll end somewhere around here. We'll see. Maybe this ring will actually keep the other ring on, and it won't matter how thin the stem is at the end. We'll see. Sometimes that does happen, and I do like seeing that. That's a nice thing. So this is all the short point making some cove sweeps. Here's the long point. Long point again. Let's maybe see if we can go underneath. Okay, don't have any clearance yet. Short point, making my stem a little thinner. And maybe a little thinner. It has to be, I have to be rather careful in here. I think anyone that's watching this might assume the same thing. I think. I only think. It's a possibility, yeah. Say what? Say that again? No. 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 Spindle gouge, what's that? No. That's a joke. Maybe not a good one, but it's okay. I'm a woodturner, not a comedian. That's what I get to tell people. They'd say, oh no, you got jokes. It's like, well, I have observational humor. This is just observational humor, just so you know. So I'm going to lower the tool rest again because I'm on a smaller scale of stem at the moment. And let's see if we can break this free. This is really thin, and I don't want it to come off. I actually really like this piece. Like it enough. Very thin. That's me asking myself, should I keep doing this? Should I keep going? How far should I go? It's like 4 at this point. You're too close to be saying that to me. No, I'm kidding. You're intimidating me. No, you're not intimidating me. So this is fun. But I like demos, guys, a lot because it's very much like just being in my workshop with friends that come over, and I can just say it's a really good energy to share this kind of stuff with others, and we all know that. That's why we show up, you know. So anyway, let's just break that free if we can. Come on, break free. There it is. So it looks like that top, or it looks like that ring will stay on, and I can't move this further. That's actually kind of a cool thing. Maybe I'll actually go ahead and account for that being the case here, where this ring, as you can see, that would want to come off the stem. It might come off over here too. However, this is blocking it. So it's a little game of precision to be able to practice and get efficient like that. This is not the first thing that you'll make with the skew. Okay, it's not. This is something that if you practice, you'll firstly learn to make some rings. We were making some rings in class the other day with the skew, and just really getting some great results, and having some fun with it. This is just going to show that there are other things to do with the skew other than open up paint cans. You know? Although I open up a wax can a few times. So it's okay to open up a wax can. It is okay. But do remember that there are other things that the tool does. That's all. That's all I have to say. Now, when I sand this, it's only going to be probably with around 320 or 400. I don't need a lot of sandpaper on this. This just doesn't need that. But I'm happy that it looks like this ring is actually staying on. I'll go ahead and round that over, and it looks like maybe what I'll do is have a little area that I can account for where there will be a slight bead, or an area that I can just keep this ring on. And maybe a little stop for the ring. If I put a little V groove there, that'll often be good enough for keeping that bead in place. Or maybe I'll put another little bead next to it. A couple little V grooves should be good enough, just so you can see that reveal of that bead. And I'm also trying to get underneath this a little bit. This is kind of annoying. But I'll use the long point to get that. I'm just trying to move that ring a little bit. There we go. So I'm only using a very small portion of the nose. And that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with what I see here. This is a pretty nice piece. I'm happy with what we ended up with. I'm checking the rings to make sure I don't have any splits on them. Looks like I don't. And I will really, for a finish, only put something like maybe a little E Ultra Shine on this, and maybe some wax. And the Ultra Shine is kind of a pumice grit finish. And that allows me for me to create a nice sheen here. Yeah, that's very thin, so I'm going to be very careful about my sanding procedure. I think that I can get away with not having any finger support in that region. And it looks like I got it. It looks like I have a little bead there as well. I'm happy with what I see. Let's maybe round that a little. But it's kind of nice to see a top where the ring should come off. And this ring should come off in all reality. But that ring, it's just a precision game where I basically have it precisely placed on here enough that it will stay on. So I'm happy with what's there. That's not too bad. I'll go ahead and go over to just some 320, guys. I'm not going to, demonstrations shouldn't be like watching paint dry. So, I'm not going to sit here and go through a large range of grits. That's not necessary. So let's go ahead and maybe add a little bit of sanding. This is just 320. Doesn't really need a whole lot of anything, but it does need some support. Some finger support. This is very, very thin. I have demos where I've had these things come off, but I don't mind. Now, I don't want it to come off, but the reason I don't mind is because you saw the process. So that's one thing that matters, is that if you're sharing, it's not so much that you see a finished item that's so good or that's so wonderful. That's always nice, but demonstration is just about sharing techniques and information. That's what it's really for. That's why we show up. Not to say, oh, I'm the only one that does this thing. It's like, we all do things. We all do lots of different things. This is just showing information that allows you to be able to practice something and get a good result. And whatever allows you to stay motivational in that way, stay motivated in the shop, is a good thing. That's good work. So, sorry about the angle here in terms of where my hands are. I'm trying to just make sure I can sand this without being in the way too much. And I think we're okay here. Again, doesn't need a lot of sandpaper, doesn't need much of anything. I'll just go ahead and say that that's probably okay. And then I'll go ahead and slow the lathe down significantly for the sake of being able to apply a little Ultra Shine. It's about all this needs. So just initially, just a little bit of Ultra Shine should be good. I don't need too much. And then I'm going to go ahead and actually see if I can melt in with a very, very light amount of pressure this compound, and then see if I can go ahead and buff it a little bit. High speed is really doing that. That's all I'm accounting for there in terms of what this needs. Also needs a delicate touch. Doesn't need much of anything else. But we made it this far. It's always a good day when you make it this far. It's a good thing. So now maybe high speed again. Let's go ahead and see if we can melt the wax in. There's that. We can see right in here. Looks like my rings are going to stay. I'm happy with that. If you do that, pat yourself on the back. You did a good job. If you make one ring just in practicing with the Skew, that's a good day as well, okay? But this is not an easy thing to make. This is actually a very hard project. This is a very complex project. But it's not something where it's made to say that the only person that can do it in the world is me. That's not true. You can do it too. It's going to take you some time to learn the Skew, and it's not going to take 20 years. It just takes the right amount of effort of practice and dedication. And that's really what it is, guys. That's really anything. It also doesn't mean that I'm trying to convert you to the Skew either. You don't have to use the Skew. As you'll see in these other demos we do, I use a lot of other tools. There's a lot of other things in wood turning that you can use to make good cuts and to make the process efficient, effective, and enjoyable. That's a good thing. So I'll probably just keep the Ultra Shine on, and I don't know if I'll add any wax. I think I probably will. I'm going to probably go for something else here. And the reason I say is because eventually what you're going to learn from me is that when I say things like, I only have one more cut to make, well, that's not true. I have probably at least 5 more cuts to make. It's kind of like that. So we'll go ahead and add a little bit of wax over that sealer, which I use. You can use this as a sealer as well. It's nice. I don't typically ever use that if I'm creating utility products. Most of what I've made in my life as a maker, as wood turner, that is been utility items. But what's nice about demonstrating and showing other people processes is just other things that you can do and just sharing those ideas. So I really do, again, appreciate being here to share these things with you guys. And just kind of have fun with you. So here we go. I'll add a little bit more Ultra Shine. What's that? What would I make for finishes? Mostly boiled linseed oil and just putting like a black bison paste wax. Yeah, just so we like furniture. In fact, I don't know if you guys saw the Shackleton Thomas book. Oh, did you guys, was that passed around? Okay, good, yeah. But essentially, if you look in that and you saw bowls, I made the bowls in there. I make typically all their bowls, not anymore. I'm now at a point to where I'll be training their woodturners. They have turners over there now that are learning the craft. There's some young guys, not that I'm not too old. I keep telling everyone I'm turning 40, and they're like, so? Hey, everyone just keeps outdoing me because they keep growing up too. You're growing up too. So that's a pretty good finish I have on there. Let's see what we have, guys, so we can have something for the room, okay? Let's pass it around and see what we can get. Pretty decent finish. I think that's where we're at. Let's do it. So I choke up on the tool a lot. I'm never back here typically because that's a harpoon. That's going to put way too much pressure into where the bevel and the cutting edge are. It's better to choke up so I have more control generally over the tool rest. Okay? So let's see what we got here. You don't want things to go too bad right now. I mean, it's kind of tragic, but I think we're close enough to being good that we're in a good space. Okay. Now, if you're really absurd and silly, like I am sometimes, you can probably take enough material down here to add a V-groove on the top of your top, the tip of the top, on the stem. I'm just removing, a little bit. Oh, there it goes anyway. It's okay. I was hoping to maybe add a V-groove there, but that's okay. This is good enough. I'm okay with that. So there's that. Let's see if we can spin it. Which one should I pass around? This is a good spinner because it has a lip on top and it won't fall out, right? It won't. Now the durability test for this is that if you drop it, the ring will probably come off. Both of them will. So probably be careful with it, but don't feel too bad if you do because it's just a thing, and I'm going to make more of them, so it's okay, but not so bad. There it is. Yep. And a good top should spin upside down. I do have a little issue here because I have a little bit of a stub there to pick off, but I bet you it might spin upside down anyway. Either way, we'll pass this around so you guys can just take a look at it. Just a little exercise that shows some fun with the skew. There it is. Yep, there it is. Yep, go for it. Okay. Keep going, huh? Let's keep going. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a piece of cherry. I had a piece of cherry. Oh, there it is. So I'm going to switch over, guys. I'm going to be using a woodworm screw right here. The lathe's off. I don't find that I have to have my safety glasses on. However, I'm going to be close enough to doing things. It's always good to just make sure it's right there. I'm going to go back down to my favorite speed, too, before I actually even consider putting wood onto the lathe. And I'm going to pass around in a second the type of vessel we'll be looking at making. I got it. I got it done. Yeah, we got it. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, it probably is now. Your drill's somewhere. It's probably, hopefully, in the car. No, that's Steve's drill. But anyway, so we'll get this on the lathe, folks. I'm going to be utilizing a piece of cherry right here, and we're going to show you how to make a traditional jam chuck with this as well, hopefully without any tailstock support. Excuse me. I'll now take a couple of pieces here. You guys will see that I have what's called a wood pottery vessel. That's kind of what I call that. This is just a semi-enclosed style piece. These are all cut with gouges. There's no scraping. There's no scrapes done on any of this vessel. It's all shear cutting with a bowl gouge and also a spear point. So I'm going to show you guys how a spear works as well. This is the bones of something that I did at a demo recently, just to show when you slice a piece in half that's smaller diameter, having a little bit of counterweight in the base is helpful so the piece isn't so chintzy and so thin that it feels like a feather. That may be an aesthetic for some people, and I do like that aesthetic. Most of the time, though, I like a little bit of counterweight. Oftentimes, what you'll see in my cross-sections are a little bit of weight in the base, but I have a very thin wall, and then I have a little bit more weight up here. I have a nice counterbalance in this piece. And this is a type of piece that we'll be looking at making. The detail may not be exactly what we do, but the article, there's an article, a fine woodworking article, where I just recently made a couple of oak vessels. That were shot by John Binzen at the Southwest School of Woodworking, and we made a wood pottery vessel. One of the things I do, and we can pass that around, I'm going to start there. One of the things I do is an e-learning course, and I also write articles for Fine Woodworking, which I really like their publication. I really am proud to be a part of what they do because I think that they've been around probably the longest in publications, and it's quality. So I appreciate what they do and the aesthetic of so firstly, when I worked at Shackleton Thomas, one of the things that they wanted me to make on the floor were very thin wall vessels that were open, and sometimes the vessels they wanted to see if I could sell walnut and cherry and maple enclosed forms, not hollow forms that were scraped, but semi-enclosed forms like that. And so that's actually a piece where the detail and the design is something that I came up with, and that was something that they used. And I'm looking to probably teach some of their makers how to make that particular design. So it's kind of like that, and I would say that a lot of those forms emulate a lot of pottery traditions out there. So I'm from the desert Southwest, so the type of forms that I like, I like many types of forms, but that to me resembles some of the type of forms that you see either in Greece, in the desert Southwest, in Asia, and so it's just an interpretation of that. So just to call it wood pottery, but it's side grain turning, really. And we'll go ahead and start with this piece of cherry. The main difference is that we have our grain structure running across the bed now. There's our longer grain here, and we're going to be running across the bed. Very different range of tools now is going to ensue. Let's go ahead and do some roughing, but initially I'll go ahead and get this on the lathe. And that'll be good. And we'll go ahead and lock the spindle. When I do that, I'm going to still make sure I have a really good hold here, and that's one keyhole. Let's get to the other. There we go. I'm going to start out with a range of different tools. So when we're looking at turning side grain, we don't have. We'll take a look at a couple tools. One that I can pass around. This is an exterior ground tool. When I'm turning a side grain vessel, this is a side grain. This will be a side grain vessel. I need to firstly true this up. The main source of vibration is that's not so good, is here around my perimeter. There's my perimeter, and here's the face of my side grain. So I have end grain here, and I have end grain here. I have side grain here, but nonetheless, what my orientation is looking like is more or less like this, where basically I'm looking to see that the bristles are spinning this way. And what I'm looking to then do is cross cut the fiber, cutting this direction. If I go into my end grain and go downhill, the reason you can't cut downhill or it's considered inappropriate or wrong to cut downhill is because of that. You cut downhill, you're just tearing fiber. You cut uphill, you're basically bending the longer grain one way, and that's basically cutting up a taper. So if you cut up a taper like this, that's going to cause the grain to bend here. So with bevel support or with scraping, cutting uphill is preferred, but it's not always the case that you must. And so we'll talk about that as we go. And what I'm going to be using for tools is either starting with something like this. These are all freehand ground tools. So that's a swept back 5/8 bowl gouge. I probably don't need to use that for very much, but save for maybe truing up my exterior. You'll still find that both of these tools, and this is the same tool, just slightly different grinds. These are deep fluted bowl gouges, but they have slightly different grinds on them. You'll see that there is a micro bevel on my main cutting bevel, and then underneath you see that I have that ground away. That angle it doesn't matter. It's just swept out of the way so that what I'm doing is making the focal point the micro bevel, and the amount of, insofar as the amount of bevel is actually touching the surface, it's only maybe about 1/8 of an inch or less. And so being that that's the case with a runoff point being the heel and then the corresponding secondary underneath, that area of the tool is not doing anything. And so that just means that the focused area of micro bevel support is accounting for touching the surface only. And it's far less likely that because I have the secondary, that there will be more bevel that's then introduced into the cut and then thrown into the surface. And so if I'm using a tool like this, for instance, this tool will wreck wood. This is essentially going to shred and wreck wood. Now that's not a bad thing if you're roughing out green material or you're just roughing a bowl out in general. I would never view this as a hollowing tool. This to me is not a hollowing tool. I would never hollow a bowl with this. But I would initially use it enough to just kind of slap a form into shape, perhaps. So if I was going to be making a green bowls, or if I was roughing stock out that was unseasoned, same thing, I might use this, and actually I would use this if I was creating stock. inventory. Most of what I create nowadays is materials is shipped to me, and I just make it. And it's typically kiln dried. So I don't have a large stock inventory currently. When I was actually working in the wholesale craft industry as a maker and did the buyer's market of American craft probably about 3 or 4 times, I would consistently have about 20 orders when I go there. That's half a year's worth of work. And the other year is about, then the other half is retail shows, and so it's wholesale and retail. But this is a tool I would be using for roughing out stock, not a tool that would be necessarily used for hollowing. The main differences between a bowl gouge and a spindle gouge are not the wing. It has a bowl gouge and spindle gouge's identification rather has nothing to do with the grind, nothing to do with the shape of the grind. It has everything to do with the depth of the flute and really just 2 categories. Now, there's a deep fluted gouge and a shallow fluted gouge. Quite simply, the easiest way to identify them is you take your thumb and you go thumbs up, and then you go thumbs over the flute. You should be able to, with the fleshy portion of your finger, of course keep that away from the cutting edge, you should be able to feel that flute quite easily without having to jam your thumb in. And that is not the case when you're dealing with something like this. You can't actually get your thumb in there, okay? And don't don't finagle it to say, yes, I can. Yeah. It's just being silly. But it's one of those things where you can quite simply tell the difference. A deep fluted gouge does have the stock both on the side of the wing and throughout the hollow grind here. Enough is taken out to still have enough in here to take heavier passes. So although I have a similar wing, very similar, that's a detail gouge. This is for rolling beads. This is for making some downhill cuts. This is for cutting some fine, clean detail, perhaps, if I'm not using a skew. Sometimes I use this. I also hollow out boxes with this and a number of other things. But this is not what I would be using. This is not what I'd be using. I can feel the flute, therefore, not the tool to use. So just want to make that point. And that's probably a good enough place to start. I'm going to be using a series of my handles with collets. And I'll start out with my 5/8 collet. That's not this one, that's this one. And maybe we'll go ahead and actually touch this up for a second. Let's maybe put maybe we'll go ahead and put a nice edge on the tool. One thing that I do want to get out on the floor is a nicely ground version of an interior-exterior. I have 2 of them, so I think one of them can go right now just onto the floor. So I'll go ahead and sharpen one up here. And I'm going to show that basically on the main microbevel sweep, that's not the area that's the secondary, but the area where that's cutting. Where is the angle around the nose on this tool? Typically around 60 degrees. I like to have a steeper angle. We'll talk about that when we're actually cutting. When I actually check to see what angle I'm at, I'm not going to put my face into the wheel on this side. That's not advised. It's not good. I want to keep my hair, my eyeballs, my teeth, my face, etc. I do want those things for as much as I can have them. So what I'll go do is be on the other side, and I want to make sure that I can actually see that small microbevel's lined up. There it is. I am a little far away from the wheel. I only want about a 1/4 of an inch gap, and that looks to be pretty good. When I start a grind freehand, or if I start a grind with a jig, I never start with the nose of the tool. That's the apex of the tool. That's going to basically take the nose right off. So what you do is you start from the wing. And so basically I'm utilizing my thumb as a stop here, and that's just accounting for being able to make my grind. And if and really just to account for a stop that doesn't overroll the tool. If I'm over here like this, or back here like that, I have a diving board effect, and I'm too far away from where the support should be on the actual rest. I want to keep my hands further up here so that really I have the ability to do that. But I will not start at the center and swing to the left or right. I'll start from the wing and then swing towards the center. So here we go. But I want to sharpen this up for you freehand just so you can see what's going around the room. There's one fresh edge. You'll see that in a minute. And then the other side, here, thumb over the flute. So basically, another way to look at it is that when you're making a cut on an exterior, around the perimeter or the face of the exterior, you want to have the thumb positioned in a way to where you would, in some position where the tool's flute would be positioned when making a cut. And you don't want that cut to happen here. You're not going to cut here, and you're not going to cut here. You need to be somewhere close to the 12 o'clock position with the flute, more or less just open. So if you're slightly rolled, it shouldn't be any more than probably about, in this case, 2 o'clock. And in the other case, with the flute facing the other direction, that's going to be about 10. Between about 10 o'clock and about 2 o'clock is where the cut happens. And that's about where I'm making sure to hold the tool at the platform. roll it all the way towards the center, and we have a brand new edge. That's looking pretty good. It's ensuring that I have a brand new, safe-looking edge. Here we go. So now, safe means that safe means that it's sharp, but it's also ground with efficiency, and that it's going to get me a repeatable result. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just grinding this back so that I can account for removing some stock at the heel. There we go. And so we can pass this around now. That'll be okay. It's a little warm. The question was, what are my thoughts on the 40-40 grind? Well, that's an interesting question. I think that it probably works. I don't need to use it, though. I don't find that it's helpful for me because I'd rather have 60 degrees at the micro bevel, and then I'd rather have a sharper angle underneath so that it can operate in a way to where I still have a clearance to be able to even roll a bead or even cut a tenon with that. But I want that 60-degree angle or something close to being steeper. What's a steep angle? Maybe somewhere between 55 and 65. Think in terms of ranges of acceptability rather than say, it must be 40 degrees. It must be this, it must be. Sometimes my tool's ground at 55, sometimes it's at 65, but I get a similar result. Now, when you have a tool ground at 60 degrees, the beauty of it is that when you're making your cuts, you don't have to drop the handle or raise it. You're keeping it rather perpendicular to the profile and to the line you're cutting, which means you don't have to enter a cut here, which you would if you're using this. If you're using the tool like this, my God, you have to really account for not dropping this tool in. If you raise the handle and you're using that much wing with an angle that's maybe closer to 40 degrees, this tool's really going to dig. So I think the 40-40 is an acceptable thing. I don't find that it's necessary. I think that, but I do like a shorter wing. You will see that you don't need a lot of wing to cut clean. I think turners use way too much wing to cut, and that's okay if you're shear scraping, but you'll never cut clean if you have bevel support and you're cutting with the wing. You're not supposed to. That's for stock removal. So that's what that cut's actually for. So we'll keep going with it. But yeah, no, not a bad grind. It works. It definitely works for those that use it. So I'm doing the exact same thing, guys. I'm getting my, let me just true this up, true the wheel up. It's a little, there we go, little full. There we go. Brand new edge coming up. Always keep your grinder probably no more than 2 steps away from you. And then I'm going to show you guys how I would apply another type of freehand grind. So that's looking good. That's good for my half-inch collet. Let's go to a 5/8. When I start here, same thing where I start on the wing. I'm looking to watch the sparks go over the cutting edge. And once I see that, I know the tool's actually grinding nicely. Keeping the body central, I have the tool in my left hand. So I will use this initially just to show that it is absolutely okay to use a swept-back grind. Even though it's not my favorite to use for the most part, but it still works nicely. It's an efficient tool. So there's one side right there. That's going to cut nicely. Learning to freehand grind is important. For me, it's been something that's been very important to me. I learned that quite a while ago. But I want my wings profile to be straight and not convex and dip into this region. I want this to go, so I don't want this to go here. I want this to be nice and straight, or ever so slightly convex is also okay as well, so that I can account for this length of the wing to touch the widest amount of surface and carry a nice clean cut. Typically that's the case with that type of shape. Let's go to the other side now. Bevel first, and all the way up to the cutting edge. And there we go. That's a brand new edge here. Swing it back around towards the nose, and then that should be good. Brand new edge there. Looking good to go. So here we go. This is a parabolic flute. Yeah, and I prefer parabolic flutes or V flutes. I don't use a round flute. No. The V is nice. I think what's comparable between the two is a parabolic. But it's one of those things where you can still grind a U-shaped tool to have a sharper nose, though. You can still do that, but you won't be using a jig for it. The jigs are ground. The jigs a jig will cause the tool to stay that profile, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. But I don't use jigs. But don't think that it's bad to not to use a jig. Jigs are great. Jigs are wonderful. See, oh, and the stone. See, I prefer using a ceramic stone. Yeah, I don't use CBN wheels. I prefer using a ceramic stone because I prefer the burr that I can get, and I like the way that the edge breaks down. So that I typically find that if I'm using the coarser grit, I can probably keep the tool in my hands for another 5 minutes. It seems to be able to be the case there. But either way, got to sharpen your tools anyway. Got to sharpen them anyway. CBNs are great. I probably recommend them for most, but I mostly am using a ceramic stone, even though I do use CBN at times. So that's a pretty good speed right there. However, I have an issue. That's good enough to see if there's any issues. Need to make sure I have my tailstock quill out. A little further than that. We'll extend it a little so I have a little bit more of a footprint in this region. I want this to maybe be ever so slightly sideways. Gives me a little bit more vibration dampening in the bed, right about in here. So that is actually a better position for my tool rest. And in terms of height, in terms of also having the live center make contact with the side grain, well, I need it to. And now it looks like I'm sitting flush. I don't need any more pressure than that, maybe just enough to take any movement out of the quill. And that's all I need to do. What I need to do now is make sure that I'm not too high or low. That's a little too high, isn't it? And that is also a little too high. Let's lower this so that the nose of the tool is going about the dead center of where my threads are on the live center. And almost there, getting close. I want to be just slightly at the dead center or maybe slightly above, and that's looking okay. That's okay. So when I start my cuts, we'll go ahead and start at a little bit higher speed. When I make my cuts, the reason you don't start at the center of a blank here is very similar to the reason you don't start at the center of a square. Same thing. Don't have any bevel support. So what I'll do, I'll speed it up a little bit, and I'll probably get maybe around close to 1200 RPM. That's a fair place to start. I want the chuck and the headstock and the motor here to absorb the vibration. Thus, I will be making cuts going this direction, going towards the headstock first. This is considered a left-handed cut because I have the tool and I have my hand on the ferrule of on the left side of the body. I find this is nice so I don't have to choke on the shavings or have it in my coffee. Let's just true up the exterior first. Now, I'm starting right at the corner. Whenever you're starting to rough a piece down, you're starting from the perimeter, going all the way across, and then corner across the face. Let's see if we can actually add a little bit more speed here. This is a safe enough setup. We should be able to do that. And looks like our blank's spinning true enough that I'll keep it probably close to what is about 1800 RPM. Body makes the cut. Not a lot of pushing motion here. It's just accounting for the body moving with the amount of pressure that would be similar to seeing a burnish and then taking that pressure and moving it forward across the tool rest. I have to be careful of something. I do not have fiber support beyond the corner here, so I have to take the cut maybe all the way to the end. However, I'll stop right before and that's because I don't want to lose that support. Getting close. And looks like we're almost there. Now we'll go ahead and stop. That's the sound I want to hear. I like that sound. It means I can actually keep going. We'll trip the face here now, but firstly what I'll do is account for not having tear out on this side. I do want to make sure that if I were to know something, the thing to know is that if I were to take all this material out and just keep going, I can tear enough on the perimeter that then the face will be affected and pull enough material out that a blemish here can be too much. It can be so much that I can lose up to probably as much as a half of an inch of material at the top if I take this heavy of a cut and then just go all the way out. So stop before the fiber support's gone and then regain it, making sure you're between centers. Come back the other direction. Just like that. That's all you need to do. And that's just ensuring that you don't have any splits on that side. Sorry, not splits, but tear. Now, if I want to see that if I have splits, I want to make sure that I true up this other side of the face as well. You don't have to go all the way down to the chuck, but because what you'll do is you will see the area where our concentric rings are going to be on this side, on this blank, which means that if I have any tear outs or splits, I'll see them immediately. I'll make a left-handed cut. This is just a little easier for where I'm located. Notice that the tool rest is also not over here. If the tool rest is here, and this is a perimeter cutting position, if I'm here, the tool will grab. It will grab mostly every time. Even if I have a deep fluted gouge, it will grab. So make sure that you always taper the tool rest to the side of the side of the face that you're making your cuts on. So here's a left-handed cut. Only looking to pull with the wing just so I can account for seeing what I have on this side. What I'm looking for is, well, any torn grain. So I'm trying to be clean enough with that cut, but it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm mostly just observing what I have on this side. And what do we have? That's it. But now we want to remove some of this material here. We don't want any of these marks. Let's go ahead and maybe actually account for truing up some material. But you'll see that it is important that, I find it important that when you cut across a perimeter here, I'm actually looking to get a burnish initially so that I can actually read the grain well enough to know if this is something I should keep working with. If I have punky grain, this question of how punky is it? If you can poke it, this is called firewood. This isn't firewood. But this is a good piece. This is healthy. This is good. I don't have any splits on where my concentric rings are. And I can see that on the other face corresponding to no splits. So that's a good thing. I'll still take the usage of my 5/8 gouge before I actually move into something that will allow me to acquire a shape. And this is a good tool to stick with, just showing that although I don't use this tool often, I probably treat this like a spindle roughing gouge, even though this is not a spindle roughing gouge and not at all for the same function. But I treat it with the same amount of maybe usage because I don't use this tool near as much as a lot of people do because I don't find it to be that effective actually. It's helpful enough, but it only is to get wood to do this. Hear that? I don't hear anything either. That's a nice sound, but I'm not necessarily thinking that this is a tool to clean a surface very much so. It really doesn't. It can, but we'll make some contrasts with a different tool that I think is far more efficient for a number of reasons. And we're not there yet. We're crossing that bridge soon enough. Higher speed now, about where I was before. Look at where the tool rest is. Well, it's tapered over. That's a good place to be. I now have support from the tool rest. That's a good thing. So we'll start from the corner. That the tool's not in a 12 o'clock position. It's more about a 10 o'clock. The 10 or 12 o'clock position, 12 isn't where you cut. 12 is where you're bringing in too much bevel, and then if you actually take the tool in and you swipe like this, that's going to be a very heavy, aggressive cut. It's also hard to read what's happening on a video too much, but what's happening is I'm rolling the tool in the same position where my thumb was over the flute when it was at the grinder for the other tool. So it's basically in that sort of 10 o'clock position. That's how I'm ensuring that my bevel isn't over ground this direction. I want it to still be as vertically as possible so that I can have a steeper angle here. So it's 60 degrees here. If you freehand grind, the beauty of it is that you can control your wing angle to be steeper if you want. That's the beauty of freehand grinding. I think the one-way Varigrind jig gets you about probably 60 degrees on the wing. I like to go up to even 70. That means that I can have the tool in the richest position possible, which is about not 12, but maybe 11, and I can still have a nice lift off in terms of the cut that I'm making. That's very dry. Let's go a little faster here, a little slower actually. There we go. I'm just basically pinching the tool to the surface. So initially speaking, this is a great tool to use. Quite dry. Diameter of the tenon will probably be somewhere in here, but this is just area I'm truing up. Also, I can take a cut coming back the other way as well. That's to say coming in this way. Now I am hitting a lot of end grain fiber when I do this, and probably my camera person. But we're just looking to true this up, and that's okay. Nothing really clean happening yet. We're just basically turning what I call a hunk of wood into round and actually into a blank. You don't really have a blank until you have an entirely trued up perimeter and a face. And then you can actually start cutting wood very clean. I think that I, as example, if I can go a little faster now, that speeds commentary on now removing the main source of the vibration, which was here, and now on the face. So now we can cut a little faster. Oh, there it goes. Looks like we did this. Higher speed's going to be that you can burnish the surface much cleaner, and if you need speed to cut. If you're not, you don't need to move quickly through a cut, but you need high speed to cut. You probably need to be running this close to 2,000 if you're going to actually get a clean surface. If you're less than 1,500, it's not fast enough. You need higher speed to be able to have the bevel trace the surface properly. So we'll take a look at that here soon. So we're right there. So a little faster. So that's about where we're at now. Let's just firstly create a burnish across the surface once we get there. And right now, this is going to just be a little bit of shaping on my exterior, and that's about it. And once we move this down a little, we'll just go ahead and slap a shape together and then actually take a look at what the tools are doing with some other tools. Probably have a tenon right there, maybe a little higher speed. That's just with the thumb in about the 10 o'clock position. And then let's do it again. Okay, let's see. And then right now, we're actually going to switch over to doing a little bit of push cutting on our exterior. So we should be able to see a really nice clean cut. There we go. And also, we're now at a stage where we've taken enough of our material off that I do want to actually still keep my center mark. But I want that nub on here. The reason I want to keep this nub there is because I want to account for being able to hollow deep enough that if I were to go, say, a little too deep, I'm accounting for the tenon to still be removed and still have that depth, not actually account for going into that tenon at all. So there should be no mark on this surface, but it's okay to have it on a small platform here. If it's on this surface, it's very likely that if you hollow a little bit too deep, then you will see a hole in the bottom of your piece. That's not what we're looking for. So having a small platform of around 1/4 of an inch is a fair thing. And we'll go up to that speed again. Let's just slow it down a little bit more. There we go. And now we'll go ahead and just move our tailstock support back. I'll true this up. That's a little high. A little slow. And now what we'll do, tailstock support back. And now what we don't have is a hole in the tenon. We don't want that, potentially, because that's essentially what I'm trying to avoid. And now we've done that. But I do need that center mark. All I want is that center mark. And now I don't really need my tailstock anymore, at the moment at least. Move that back a little bit. A good blood in the veins policy is a good thing to have. And I will remove my tailstock. Live center. Trying hard. There we go. Now back to using the 1/2 inch. Now we'll get some really clean cuts. Higher speed. You guys will see a nice burnished surface develop here in a second. Right now I'm not concerned so much with a perfect surface or a perfect surface for the sake of what I want for a final form to then hollow into. Right now what I'm looking for is just seeing how the tool's working, taking a look at an exterior tool. I don't have a very long wing on this tool. Very short, actually. But it's no longer than it's probably a little shorter than the flute is wide. But that's a good burnish right there. and into the corner right there. Let's see what we have for a surface. Micro bevel is ensuring that what we have is only a certain amount of material, that's to say our bevel, touching the surface. It's not very much. It's maybe about 1/8 of an inch. And what you eventually see is a surface that is entirely void of tear out, and that's essentially cut to probably 320. It's cut to something that would be close to that. So if you're cutting uphill, that's just because the fiber is bending this direction. I would not be able to create that type of sheen if I was spinning probably lower than 1500. For me, I prefer a higher speed so that the amount of actual to payload in terms of pressure is very minimal. And that's what I'm looking for, is minimal pressure. So a burnish is a nice surface. It's nice to create a surface that doesn't have tear out on it, but it's not necessarily the best surface. It might be, it might not be. I prefer having a surface that is shear scraped. And although this is a lovely surface, I'll just kind of keep going and focusing on the tenon. I will then take a look at maybe a couple of other tools. I'll talk to you guys about rolling some beads, but then also about how to use a spear. Yes, yes. This is a 1/2 inch interior, exterior. Yep. And that's not a type of tool. It's just kind of what I coined for having a tool that has a shorter wing and has it around the perimeter of the micro, or has the secondary bevel surrounding the perimeter of the micro bevel. So when I actually cut a tenon here, I can actually still use this tool because the wings are cut back enough for that. However, I'll still use a different tool just to kind of show just different tool work, different things. Not to say there's only one thing to do. There's a lot of things to do. There's lots of ways you can do things. Yeah. So let's talk about hobbies. I've recently acquired them in the last about 5 years. Let's just say that. Because I spend a lot of time on the lathe. A lot of time on the lathe. I really have. Yeah. Yeah, you have to just keep at it. Practicing things like this is important. It's the same with the skew chisel. It's the same kind of thing. Just spending time at the lathe. You'd be surprised, though. Don't let anyone tell you, oh, with 20 years you'll be able to, It's just, I just do it professionally, so I've had to spend more time doing it. But if you really have an interest in something, your passion and what level of built-in talent you have for something, or developing skill and talent, because those things kind of work and coincide, will get you where you want to be. And it's not BS. I really mean that. It's true. It really is true. Let's cut a tenon here. That's probably a good size for a tenon. I've worked on a one-way chuck enough. This is about the same size. I do have, oh, that's really blunt. Let's fix that up real quick. Did I let you borrow this? No. All right. So, quick fresh edge. And let's go ahead and get the nose round. There it is. All right. Same speed. And what I'll do is I'll apply a tenon. There we go. It's ever so slightly dovetailed, not too much. By the way, in terms of a shoulder, I don't need all that material here. I only need a very small amount of it. That tenon's looking good. So let's go ahead and make another cut uphill. I only need about that much material for a shoulder. So basically the shoulder is, where's my pencil? Somewhere, oh, there it is. The shoulder's only about 1/8 of an inch. That's it. That's my shoulder. You might say, shouldn't I have a longer shoulder that runs the full width of the jaws? You don't need that. You need it if you're probably coring. Having that a little extra space is helpful if you're on a 16 to 20 inch core. That's probably more helpful. But for a small bowl like this, you need a small area like this. Thank you for the video. It's good video work. Thank you. That's looking really good here. I only need about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. And then above, it's good to have just a little platform so that what you can do is more evenly and more easily, blend a curve. If you're blending a curve into a high spot, that curve will much more easily extend and then continue the line down through into where your tenon is. But I don't need all of this material to be a shoulder. Oftentimes what I see from turners is too wide of a surface to account for your shoulder that you just don't need. You only need a small shoulder, a little bit of a platform for the sake of blending the curve, and then an ever so slight dovetail, and that looks to be ever so slightly tapered uphill. I'm just kind of doing a final check on it. That's very sharp. And that's what I'm looking for right there in the corner. I'm just turning the tool into, it's from about a 9 o'clock position here, and then the same position at 9, but rotating the tool over so that this wing can catch. That's why the wings are so ground back heavily, is so I have clearance. So that clearance, yeah, that's the spindle gouge. That's the detail gouge, which is a spindle gouge. Yep. Get into a corner, and then I pull, and that's it. And then I'll go over to this tool again. What's nice about a 60-degree angle here, let me move this a little closer, is that I can get directly into this corner without digging too much. If I'm using a tool like this 5/8, surely I can get into a corner, but the trouble is if I take the tool into the corner, all I'm doing is swiping. See the surface here, see the surface there. Quite a bit of a difference. That's just kind of scraped. Scraping's not bad. Just in that situation, I'm looking for a cleaner cut. Long point to the left. If I hear a little vibration, just stop the cut and then go back and only take off half the ridge. You'll go back to an area where you'll pick the cut right up if you start rubbing the bevel first. Remember, burnish mark. If I see a burnish mark, that means that I can just take the tool up and I'll pick up anything about less than a 1/16 of an inch or more. I'll pick up that surface. Just letting the bevel do the work. I'm not really watching what the tool's doing. I'm watching the silhouette. I'm watching up here. I'm watching my line form. Slightly going downhill a little bit, but I'm suggestively creating the curvature that I'm going to have up here eventually. So that's a pretty good surface. I'm happy with what's there. Nice when it stops on its own and I don't bog the motor down. More clean surfaces, but that's nice. That's also burnished nicely. Won't see any tear out there. So I'm happy with that. When you see a nice shine, it's a good day. Okay? Good day, sunshine. How about that? So I'm going to roll some beads now and show a nice exercise. So when you're cutting uphill, when you're practicing with this tool and you're cutting beads, cut uphill so that you can pull a bead. You don't want to push a bead. You want to pull a bead. That's just to say I'm going from 9 o'clock, that's 12, right? That's open at 12. So really being all the way on the side when I can see the longer wing, that's just again for clearance, that's about 9 o'clock. That's 9 o'clock. I'm going to open the tool up to about 10 or 11 and then go back to 9. So it's 9, 10, 9, 10, 9. So if I'm practicing, this is something that will allow me to pull the tool a little bit, pull the fiber uphill. One way you can do it is just make a equidistant series of V grooves. There's one, there's another, and so on and so forth. But right here, roll it. Just pull the bead. It's a lot easier to do it this way than to go from 3 o'clock 1 o'clock, then 3 o'clock. It's okay to do that and practice it, but I would suggest that if you're practicing rolling beads up a surface for the sake of just practice, try it this way first and get used to it. Also see that the distance of my beads are allowing me to go over a little bit wider surface. That's kind of similar to rolling a equidistant spherical shaped bead on a profile, on a spindle. Overhand grip's a little easier to manage the tool. But the point being is that at 9 o'clock, that's just a V groove. Drop the handle, open it up to about 10 or 11. That's basically just letting the tool drift. But I drift back into 9, 10 or 11, 9. Same thing, 11, 9. Gets a little difficult when I'm all the way over here. I have to move my body just a little bit, but it's a good practice, not only in dexterity, but of just the general body movement that's needed to support the cuts around the lathe. And when you have a series of beads, you can then actually focus on the type of roll that's necessary to continue the cut from about the 10 o'clock position. And that's not here. That's going to be about here. There's a drift from 10 to 9, 10 to 9, 10 to 9. You can see that there's bevel support at the nose. And that's where the bevel support should be with the gouge, not on the wing. There will be some bevel support on the wing. Always, if you're making a heavy cut and pulling a shaving, it means the bevel's actually being thrown into the fiber. But in this case, this is just kind of showing a little practice. Let's see what we have. Then I'll turn this back into that same form again, turn the piece around, and then we'll talk a little bit about detail and how I'm not necessarily looking for this in this stage right now to be the perfect shape or form, although in terms of tear out, if you can zoom in a little, you won't see any tear out on that surface. Okay, so practice helps, it pays off. It doesn't make perfection either. Perfection's nonsense. In craft and art, it's not seeking perfection. It's always seeking where's the last stage of where I could see some progress and what accounts for me getting to the next stage. That's all it is, guys. That's all it is. And so let's also do something. I want to show you guys what happens when you cut downhill. It's okay to do, by the way. There's not enough people that say it's okay to cut downhill. I'll be that guy. It is okay to cut downhill. Because if you know how to clean a surface going back the other way, you can do that as much as you want. You can cut downhill till the cows come home. You can cut downhill. Just don't think that you should end on a surface that's cut downhill. But for the sake of just getting the form, cut downhill all day. You can do that all the time. I'm going to show you cut downhill. So I'll start from up here. Generally speaking, this is just a perimeter cut. And when I'm cutting from this perimeter just across this surface here, that's just essentially hitting that's just a pure cross grain cut. So I'm hitting the grain right here. So that's bending the fiber evenly. Up here in this section, this upper third region. When I get down to this region, that's going to pull the fiber now this direction out like that. So I have to be cautious of that. But initially, I can start the sweep for the type of form we're going to make anyway. My aim is to turn something like this and not have any tear out on the entire piece. So we'll see if we can get there. Oh, so great question. So the question, did everyone hear the question? How do you sand the beads is what the question was. Well, for something like this, if this were the form you wanted, which that's an okay form to work with, when you roll beads, you're going to just roll a barrage of beads initially. And you'll be so obsessed with it, you'll just be like, oh, there's beads, it's good enough. Yeah, I know. Okay, fair enough, thank you. But I would say that you can, if you're sanding a bead, you shouldn't be anywhere under 320. Because if you are, you're likely gonna, the roundness will go away, the sharpness of the bead and the curve will dissipate. Helpful. So higher speed again, folks. Hopefully this won't bog down. I'm gonna get a fresh edge too. Oh, look, there's a grinder. It's nice that it's right there, guys. I shouldn't say, oh, look, there's a grinder and have to walk 50 yards down the hall. Shouldn't have to do that. Should be right here. And other edge. There she is. And this should cut a little cleaner, a little easier. That's nice, sorry. I'm going to make a little sweep out in this region, just sweeping that profile just a hair. There we go. Now you'll eventually see that these cuts are clean. Just because I'm cutting the cross grain. That's all cross grain cut. So you see that burnish? The nice burnish, it's very clean. Left-handed cut. It's not until I get down to this region, probably around in here, that the downhill cut will change. And I'm basically reculturing how I'm bending the fiber. And that just means that I'm tearing out when I'm from about this region down. When you see the curve break from about where the more perpendicular and straight area is sitting adjacent to the tool rest, once you see the shift in the sort of half round bead here, well, and I go downhill, then what's going to happen is I'll just be tearing out that fiber badly. I want you to see that. A good demo helps you to see that fiber can be torn out and mistakes can be made and you can fix it. It's okay to fix it. But there's a downhill cut. Nothing wrong with acquiring a shape this way. You're going to see tear out probably right in here. Even if I have a micro bevel, I should see a little tear out in there. It's not because I want it so bad. I don't want tear out, but it's good to show that if you have tear out there, that's okay. I'm now just increasing the depth of this platform. That's absolutely an okay thing. It's likely that what I'm going to do for my final depth will be somewhere maybe around in this region. I'm hoping it ends about right here. I'll just put a little line there to reminding myself that I want to probably end final depth about right there. That's about what I want to see. Let's also take a look at the surface we have now. It'll be burnished, but there'll be an area that because I'm cutting downhill, I will probably see some tear out. Let's see what we got. And that's okay to see. It's also okay that you have it at this stage, but I want you to see that? So there's my tear out. And I'm not trying to just be more aggressive with the tool. I'm cutting up with about the same level of focus and pressure, but you'll see that where the end grain fiber is usually commentary on where your tear out is. So cutting downhill isn't what I want. But this shape is, generally speaking, decent enough that I can flip this around now, okay? Let's do one more push cut from the base, just to show how we can steer the tool again. Glad this lathe is deciding to keep starting, like when lathes start. That's good. Right with the nose, I'm only using about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch of bevel right there. You'll see a very different surface form. So I don't want to have fiber support, lose fiber support there. And back the other way with the left hand. Just enough so I can create the initial sweep. This is probably about all I need to do for now. And I'm happy with what I see there for a form, roughly speaking. It's a pretty good shape. It gets me a good start to be able to see something else. Let's do one more type of cut since we saw beads. We saw how those are rolling. We saw the swept back grind here. I'll pass this around. Go long, someone. No. Right? You know what I do? I read through ceramic books. You know where I got my sense of form from? Working at Shackleton Thomas mostly, and being around potters. I learned most of what I know about form from potters and from much older interpretations of form and just more of that type of aesthetic. Woodturners are new. We're new to the field of craft and art, actually. So enough so that, and I know it looks ridiculous. It's like you're 40 years old. I understand how that looks. But I've spent some time really studying it. Shackleton Thomas, Miranda Shackleton, that's Charlie's wife. Charlie is the furniture designer over there, and he kind of runs the place. It's at the 100-year-old Bridgewater Mill, and they make really very fine furniture, but they also make fine pottery. And so I spent a lot of time around potters when I was apprenticing, milling stock and actually making chairs, which, by the way, I'm a terrible furniture maker. I suck at making furniture. But I do turn very efficiently, and that was just what I ended up doing. And I had that passion for it and spent way too much time doing it. But the golden mean, those are all really good things to study and look at. I think that that can help people a lot, but it doesn't make sense. It makes sense. It doesn't help you become more finesse oriented at the lathe. It doesn't make you turn better because you can see a form. I see a form clearer. It makes more sense to me to practice the technique and learn how the line's forming and know where the curve needs to break in order to know where your rim should be and what's disturbing a line and what's actually accentuating it, and also whatever corresponding details and where they should be on the piece. So we're about to dive right into all that. That's good stuff. Guys, I want to switch over to doing something else out here. Let's talk about one thing first. Well, with this type of form, you don't need a perfect shape yet or a final shape yet. Why might that be? Well, if I clamp down onto this tenon, the corresponding movement or subsequent movement due to the amount of pressure I hold on here will change and reculture the fiber in this region enough that there will likely be some movement out here that I'll have to true up a second time. It's very likely that before I hollow in, I'm just repeating myself, it's very likely that before I hollow into this, I will have to true up this profile again a second time. That's not a bad thing. That's just part of the game. So just know that right now, when you're on an exterior, this is a good area to practice where you don't have to say, I must be beholden to make this bowl when you don't necessarily need to. Sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes you just need to practice and just put your hand on that tool and make these cuts, make very light cuts, and just see clean surfaces form and practice that. My classes show that a lot, where I show people really what you need to do where you can get better at individually and how you can make a difference in your own life in your workshop. And that's a good place to be in life anyway. It's a good place to be. So on the angle that I have on my wings here, that's grounded about 60, but anywhere from between 60 and 70 degrees. So you'll see the spear. I won't be throwing it around the room, but I'll be a spear where you throw it. We're not that medieval, but well, that's a different conversation. Yeah, that's a different conversation, isn't it? But you'll see that tool really is very effective. It's a much more effective shear scraper than a gouge for a particular reason. And I'll just use the half-inch spindle gouge to describe this. Now, let's just assume that this is a deep fluted bull gouge. It is not, but it's the same grind that you see there. It's good that that's around so we can describe what's happening there, how that mirrors what this is doing. So the reason I prefer using this tool is that when you use a swept-back wing, deep fluted bull gouge. Now this has a secondary on it as well. I have to hold the tool in this position. Can we get a shot that goes to show the little gap that we should be looking at? Thank you, that's great. You see the little gap that I have there? Now you see it, now you don't, but there's the gap. I'm minding a gap which is maybe around 1/16 to 1/4 of an inch. That's just to ensure that I don't have bevel support when I'm making a pull cut. If I make a pull cut uphill, that's going to clean the fiber nicely. Actually, if you make a pull cut downhill without the bevel support, you will also cut clean. It's not really advantageous to move this way. You want to move towards where there's more material away from or with a taper, uphill, up a taper. It's a little easier to make this cut. The trouble is that if there is bevel support in the cut, you're not actually cutting a sheer fiber, you're cutting a shaving, which is thicker. So now what we're looking to do is not actually create this. We're not looking, you might say, well, that's a very fine shaving. I'd be very happy with this. I wouldn't. For what I'm doing, I want something thinner than this, and I want it to be very, very fine. I want to essentially cut very fine spider web-like shavings, and I could toss them into the air, and they would float to the ground like they're jellyfish in the water, like an aquarium or something like that. And that fine shaving is very helpful. Now, if you have bevel support here, because why would you be digging with this? Because of the hollow ground flute. The hollow ground flute, bevel support and a cutting edge, pulling in any direction, what it will do is cut. What you do when you roll the tool over a little bit more, because there is no bevel support, is scrape. That's a scrape. That's a cut. That's a scrape. So just because you have the tool with the long wing and it's pulling doesn't mean you're shear scraping, because you're not. You're cutting, actually. So you're scraping if you're here. But why would I want to use something that has a flute in it when I run the risk of having the bevel being so close to the cut anyway, and also having to roll it so much and drop the handle enough that sometimes the tool rest will, on a form like this, or other forms that aren't as extremely convex, have an issue of the tool rest obstructing the path of the cut. The tool rest is obstructing the path of the cut here. When I get to about here, I got to adjust and adjust and adjust and adjust. That's not a bad thing. It means you're getting a job done based on a preference for a type of tool that is a reflection of a good result, that's reliable. That's not bad, that's good. However, the reason I would rather use this is because I don't have a hollow ground flute. And so if I use bevel support with it, it's not going to dig and then actually cut a shaving, cut a thicker shaving. This will cut glass. This will cut a glass surface. So I want you guys to see this now, and then realize that if we still have to do some shaping, that's okay. Because it's very likely we will anyway, given the amount of pressure and the subsequent movement that happens with that pressure here, even if we have a perfectly cut tenon. However, I will show you a way to line your grain up with a chuck that can help to counteract some of the movement a little bit too. That's probably something that you guys haven't seen. Or maybe you have, but well, it's something I like to do. Now let's sharpen this up. I need a fresh edge, 60 to 70 degrees. Let's see if I can check out to see where this is at, and it's a little off. Let's go ahead and change that here. And where are we? Are we right on the cutting edge, the bevel? And I'm looking to be right on that bevel here. And I'm not sure what exact angle this is. It's probably around 60 degrees, 60 to 70. What I use to check my angle is this extremely expensive Harbor Freight special. No, Harbor Freight is special. But something like this you can get like at Ace Hardware. And all I'm doing is taking a look to see what angle I'm at. I'm actually at about 65 degrees. So I'm just basically lining this protractor up with that angle there. And what I'm looking at in terms of my readout, sorry, I'm chasing the camera. I know that's super annoying. But I can look in this little teardrop window right here. That's about 65 degrees. I prefer a burr because I find that the tool will wear down to where it needs to be resharpened again and give me a little bit more time with the tool in my hand. That's really it. What's beautiful about this tool in terms of what you get on a surface is that you can create almost the same burnish that I created with the gouge, or you can actually cut the fiber without the burnishing. And get just as clean of a surface, So I like that there are a couple options in using this tool correctly. So let's go ahead and see about the wing. Pretty simple, straightforward, because I don't have to account for anything but making sure I don't have a diving board. Don't want a diving board. Fresh edge on one wing. So that's pretty good right there, fresh edge. You see the micro bevel right there. That's to account for being able to also cut a tenon with this. I can cut a tenon and use this to roll a bead as well. You can roll beads with this too. It's really quite lovely. There's a lot you can do with this tool. There we go. That's all I need to do. So back to it. And let's see what this tool can do for us. So if we turn the lathe on to a higher speed again, just to show you can cut a tendon with it, let's cut one. Let's go back into where we are here. So right in this region, the reason I have that bevel there, that's ground back enough, probably at what I see is maybe a 30-degree angle, 30 to 40 degrees, but I can get all the way into the corner. And it cuts really nicely, and I can go all the way down. The other thing I'm going to do now is take a look at getting a very fine surface and show you the type of shaving I want. As shavings connoisseurs, as woodturners as we are, we should be shavings connoisseurs. We should start with a thicker shaving, go to a slightly thinner shaving, and then the third layer of shaving should just be very fine powder and like a spider web-like shaving. So let's create that. I'm holding the tool at a shearing angle, which means it's not flat. It's ever so slightly lifted or actually raised like this, so it's not flat. Video only shows so much, but I'm dropping the handle just a hair and then rotating this direction. What's also nice about this, in contrast with, again, the gouge, which has a hollow ground flute, I don't have to roll the tool so much. All I have to do is make sure that I'm rolling enough to where I can actually pick that fiber up. You might say, what's the reason I can cut cleaner, and why do I have to do this versus just do that? Why can't I just take a tool and do this? It has to do with where the fiber is being laid down. Basically, if I know that the fibers are laying down and being pulled in the direction towards the rim, that way, it means that as long as I have an angle, a slight arced angle like this, cutting, and I'm not here, it's then this section of the tool, this edge, is not actually hitting end grain fiber. It's just out of the way and chasing the end grain fiber. So I may hit a little bit of it, but not enough that it's focused flat and just shredding it. That's just shredding the fiber. You're not going to cut clean. Now, you can cut a shape, but you won't cut the surface clean. You have to actually rotate up so that those fibers that are facing this direction across the bed are eventually, that end grain fiber, okay, it's spinning and hitting this direction. It's going here. There's a portion where end grain's spinning and hitting this direction. And so if you're flat here and intersecting, that's just going to hit that fiber. You want to start dropped so that you're pulling the longer fiber, so that you're chasing the end of the fiber. That's why you drop, that's why you rotate the tool in this direction. If you're here, you will always hit end grain fiber. If you're here, you'll always just be shy of it. And even if you do touch it a little, you'll be hitting so little of it that you'll still cut a predominantly clean surface. That's what a shear angle is on side grain. That's what it actually is. So that's the shaving I want. And what's beautiful about this tool as well is I can pull or push with it, provided that I keep the shearing angle. You might say, well, I'm losing that chatoyance or that shine from the burnish. That's absolutely okay. It doesn't actually change the grit that I would be starting with to sand an exterior. It just means that I don't have bevel support on the surface to account for creating the ability to then heat up the tannins in the wood. If you're heating up the tannins in the wood, well, what you're going to do then is burnish. I'm turning very quickly in terms of speed, but my touch is very soft, and there is no bevel support on my material. But you'll see that this is just as clean of a surface, and this is about the shaving that I'm after, right in here. That's what I want to see. So let's stop the lathe for a second, and we'll see what we have. But I want you to see that when you were getting down to a very final range of shavings, make sure that you return the shavings ball to me. I need that back. It's really, really important that I get it back. The negative rake shear scraper. Let's talk about what it's good for first, because it's not good for too much. So negative rake scrapers are great. They're better to be used on harder rosewoods, harder woods. whether it's an exotic wood or not, because we have exotic wood here too. So it's like our country has we have exotic wood here too. Yeah, yeah. So when you're thinking about harder materials and you're, say, cutting into end grain fiber, so this is, let's change the orientation, and let's say that we're hollowing out a box. Negative rake scraper is a wonderful option if you're cutting something like cocobolo or like a Honduran rosewood. It really actually cuts clean enough that you can scrape the end grain and get a very, very fine surface because the grain's so tight. So that will allow you to cut beautifully. So for a negative rake scraper usage, regarding negative scraper usage, that would be something that has more to do with cutting a harder wood and making sure that I'm not catching. And that's what that will do. That will counteract the force of dig and feed. The question was about why do I use a negative rake scraper, or why would I? Negative rake scraper, do you know what that also is? It's a skew chisel. It's just a skew. It's just a skew. It's a skew. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And then the profile may be different. Sometimes you see negative rake scrapers that look like this, but they have an angle. They have a bevel on the top too. And the angle doesn't really matter actually. If someone tells you it does, it's because they're trying to anyway. It doesn't matter what the angle is. You just need two bevels, and you have a negative rake scraper, and that's what counteracts the force of dig and feed. A single bevel always throws itself into the wood with greater force and always tears more as a result. So negative rake scrapers, if you're a little too heavy-handed, if you apply a little bit too much pressure, negative rake scraper is a great option. Don't chastise people that are using them and get a good result with it because they don't use a single bevel. I mean, it's silly, right? Good question. Thank you for that. Yeah, sir. But for for instance, if this were a negative rake scraper, if this had a second bevel on it on the top, there is no way that you can do this. If you do, you're actually cutting. You're using the bevels to cut the fiber like a skew, and then you'll have a terrible catch. That's what that is. Yeah. So you want to make sure that if you're tilting the tool and using a single bevel, you can do this. You can do both actually, but you're better off here anyway because you're hitting way too much end grain if you're flat on the tool rest. So let's take a look up to this line. We have a little burnish mark up here. Let's see about burnishing the surface. Now this is just as clean of a surface. Maybe we can take a look at that. By the way, this is when you can read the grain when the lathe stops. Sometimes shapes look really pretty when they're spinning fast. Then you have to stop the lathe and say, oh, that's not so good, right? So that takes time. Notice the burnish area here all the way up. It's not much different or too dissimilar. You know, we have a pretty nice form here, and either way, no tear out. So that I could start sanding that probably at 220 or 320, and I'm happy with that. That's not a bad day in the shop. I'm not looking. No, these are cut with the wings essentially. These are cut that way. These are milled that way, and then I grind I set the angle on it and put the bevel on them on this. Yeah, and I sell them too. So if you want one, I make sure you get one. Here, I'll just throw one your way, huh? A spear skew, yeah. Let's burnish this surface up to here and then flip it around and take a look at maybe applying some fine detail, and then let's hollow it out and actually take this off the base. How about that, guys? Sound good? Okay, same speed. Now what I'll do is I'll lead with the bevel instead of the cutting edge. There's a cutting edge. Nice cut there, that's okay. Here's the etiquette. The etiquette for me is I want to make sure that the cut is louder than the motor, that the motor is louder than the cuts that I'm making. The second part of not the first part I said, the second. I want to make sure that I can actually hear the motor and that the cut's very quiet. It's almost as though the motor's like white noise to me. Now that's not a burnish yet. I'm just kind of working the surface a little. Just showing you that you can cut downhill as well as long as you maintain a shearing angle. Works just as well and efficiently. The other beauty of being able to get a final form and to look at line when you're really getting more serious about developing that way and seeing your forms more clearly as you do, is you'll trace the profile more of the profile here. You'll see the silhouette more so there, and you'll be looking at that more than you're just watching the tool. But that's what I want to see, this stuff right here. That should float to the ground. Kind of, sort of. Good. Very good. So let's see a burnish first. It just means bevel's making the contact. There's a burnish. Ha. Just go back to the bevel, find a little burnish mark in there. But the beauty of this is that if I have bevel support using this tool, guess what? I can use it. It's okay. I don't have a hollow ground flute, so this isn't actually going to pull the shaving. It's going to just pull dust. And very fine powder. I should say powder. Dust is almost a curse word to what I'm pulling off of this because it is so fine. The shaving's so fine. But basically, you're coming back to lead with the bevel first. You create your burnish mark, and then you're just picking up your cut. But up into this region, this just kind of shows that you can also burnish with that tool. And actually, the finer shaving, this is probably one of the finest shavings you can get. And I'm going to pass this around too. I know I'm silly with that, but it's good to actually see the fiber that's coming off the lathe. It's a demo. You should be able to see that. So you guys can see that we have a nice burnish in here too. That's just from scraping. That's scraping. The beautiful thing about using a scraper, in this case a spear, I don't have to worry about digging. Okay. Not near as much. Of course, you can apply as much pressure as you want, and you'll dig all day long. But you don't have to. It's not near as much if I'm using a scraper as opposed to a gouge. So let's pass this around. This is what I want to see. So good. But anyway, we'll go ahead and just kind of flip this around. And decent form, but I'm going to add a little fine detail probably at the rim, and we'll have a really nice looking piece. I'm not so much about making sure that I make the same piece that would be considered a signature style piece of mine. I just want something to emulate that form so we can see the clean surfaces and utilize the tools and see what we can get from that. Okay. So when I'm lining up my grain, my fiber is all, if we can maybe get a little closer. So my grain is currently facing this direction. My longer grain is here. I'm looking to line up with the jaws, these two jaws, either with the end grain fiber here, because there's the end of the grain here, my vertical line there. That just goes to show. So I'm looking to line up the end grain fiber between this area right here. These two jaws should be clamping right in here. Because the rate of expansion and contraction is more even when I do this, when I'm in this region. It's a little bit more even. And so, so that's just lining your grain up. So that's with the end grain, or you could use the side grain as well. The side grain could do the same thing. You're looking to split the difference between this gap and either lining up cross grain or end grain. And I typically will do that until I get the best, until what I end up having is grain that's, or a piece that's spinning truer than it wouldn't. Yeah, it helps. It does. It usually makes a little bit of a difference. And how much is the difference worth? Enough to where all I have to do is shear scrape, not make a heavy aggressive cut. So that's okay. Looks like we're good. And by the way, I'm not a fan of serrated jaws because, and let's see here in this case. Oh, this is a prime example. I'm right at a tenon length where the end of the tenon is actually hitting one of the serrations, so it's likely that this piece might be slightly jarred off center due to one of those serrations clamping down and clenching onto the corner of the end of my tenon, which I can see in here. So that may be the case. That's why I do not use serrated jaws. I want you guys to see something. This is what I don't want, but this is just what we have. Either way, it's okay. It's still going to be good. The thing that I care about, though, is not having any gap between the face of the jaw and the shoulder, and that's reasonable enough. But do you see that serration right here? See that serration? That serration's hitting the end of the tenon, and that could actually be one of the reasons that the piece might not run perfectly true. It jars it off just ever so slightly. That's why I don't use serrated jaws. Yeah, dovetail jaws. So if you have these, do you throw them away? No, don't throw them away. They're still good jaws, just they're not dovetail jaws suitable for side grain turning on average, but they're great for holding onto square stock. The piece I had up here before, because I know I had these jaws, I wanted to make that point later. So here we are making that point. Now for end grain fiber, sure, I'll clamp on down to a square and I'll make sure I have tailstock support. However, if I have a dovetail on a side grain vessel, that little serration will jar the piece off enough that that's probably going to cause some out of roundness. What's funny is if I do demos like this, sometimes I make that point, and sometimes it happens, and sometimes it doesn't. I actually want the point to be made that it's out of round a little bit. because it's still a safe hold. Now there's one quarter turn to the right with one keyhole, one quarter turn to the right on the other. And let's not spin at a ridiculously high speed. Let's actually bring the tool rest up, make sure that we're looking at an area where we can actually visibly see some out of roundness and see where we're at. But it probably is due to the serration if it is a little out of round. And that's okay. We just true it up. And let's see how out of round or in round it is. That's actually not pretty bad. I'd say that that's spinning pretty true. But I will tell you, if you're running this at 1,200, 1,000 RPM or higher, what you won't notice is how out of round this is. Why does it matter to one second? Why does it matter to true this up now? Well, if I hollow in and I'm getting to a thin wall and I'm out of round on the exterior, by the time I go through a finishing procedure at all, I'm going to have a lot of chatter mark from the sandpaper. The grit is not hitting 360 degrees of rotating surface. It's hitting something less than that, but enough to where it's skating against the grit, and I'll have a lot of streaking. So I want to make sure that what I do is I true this up a second time. You can still see visibly that's slightly out of round. Let's see. It's a little out of round. You might say, well, so what? It's not so what now. It's so what after. Right now it is so what, but it's so what enough that it matters, because when I hollow into this and I get to the thinner wall, what am I also doing? I'm going to increase the amount of pressure, and thus there'll be a consequent amount of vibration that will be greater than this. It'll be even greater than that. So when I finish the piece, and say for instance all is done and well, and I have fine detail on here, how well do you think I'm going to be able to sand it? Not very well. It'll all go really mute, and it won't stay sharp. So that's the whole point. So that's not so badly out of round that I can't just true this up. Let's go ahead and do that. This is a small enough piece so what you're saying is true, that there's greater mechanical accuracy when you're in a smaller clamping, when the jaws are closer to closed position. Usually anywhere between closed and about 1/4 of an inch of a gap is closed enough. This is quite a bit wider than that. However, this is a small enough diameter that it doesn't really make a difference. To me, I'm looking at that principle though when I'm at probably 12-inch diameter. Then I'm probably not even using the set of jaws. I'll probably, for my own work, be using a set of dovetail jaws, and maybe have a 1/16 of an inch. I'm very accurate with that. But this is a small enough piece that you just true up the exterior again. You're not losing enough material to compromise the hold in a way to where it's actually that much better, that it's down to 1/4 of an inch to closed position. But it's a very good point, and something to be mindful of, that if you are turning bowls, it is better to have a jaw in a more closed position than an open position. This is allowing the functionality of the piece to work more. But that's a very good point, and true. That's very good. So we'll true up the face here with an interior-exterior tool, and I'll just make the cut from the corner going inward and show something else. That when you are making this cut, now every cut that we get into when we get back from lunch here, every cut we're making is a hollowing cut. It's all going forward this direction, all like this. Now the cut that I'm making here is accounting for the fiber that exists here. And basically I'm looking to go in this direction. I don't want to tear this out. However, I will a little bit. So it's better to know that if I'm going to do this, don't take off from the center of all that fiber and move all of this material out this way. That's commentary on taking a very large amount of stock out here. So I'm making a cut towards the center, right? That's what I'm doing right now. So just take out the outer layer of the fiber on what would be essentially like a brush. Go here instead of here. So that just means that I'm only taking off probably around a 1/16 of an inch, maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to true this up first because this is the area furthest away from the chuck, and I just want to get rid of that. My main source of vibration is still probably here, but I'll start here because of that. I don't like that sound. And now what we'll do is we'll go up to a much higher speed. That's probably around 2,000 RPM. I'm going to cut right with the nose, and we'll see that as long as I'm still cutting end grain fiber, but with some bevel support, and with a micro bevel, this should cut like glass. See what that did? Point is that you can cut into end grain fiber so long as what you're not taking off is probably any more than 1/8 of an inch of stock. And if you look at that, that goes to show you I'm cutting directly into end grain fiber. Okay? So I would say that this is probably a good time to take a break. This is a good time to take a break because this is now at a point where we'll be able to dive directly into adding some fine detail, truing up the piece a second time on our exterior, and then we'll be able to hollow and make a beautiful form. So guys, I want you to come up and then I want you to see that surface that we just cut. And know that if you cut into end grain fiber, you can do it. You absolutely can. Just don't take off probably any more than 1/8 of an inch if you're doing that. The reason I cut with a much shorter nose or much shorter sweep, which is just a reference to how long the wing is because when the cut inevitably rides up the wing, I don't want it to go up this much of a wing. That's almost funny to me because that's a bad tear out. There's a lot of tear out. So that's why this is not a type of grind in terms of the wing, not in terms of the flute because it's a spindle gouge, but if I were to use this, if this were to be a deep fluted bull gouge, this is not the tool that you hollow with. It really isn't. I'll be showing you that. But you guys can take a look at that surface and see there's no tear out on it. It's milled, basically, okay? High speed, micro bevel makes the difference, okay? So we'll come, when we come back, we'll probably get enough to show how we get the form into shape and true it up, and then when we come back from lunch, we'll hollow this out, get that finished, and then I'll start thin wall vessel. How does that sound, guys? Okay, very good. So we'll come back and we'll keep going. We've got some more stuff to do, folks. Appreciate it. Thank you.